Ljótsbyrjagallar helgar kindir Meiri og minni Möguheimdalar Vilt vad jag val föder väl fyrtälja Fornspjöld fyra þá fremst mann Hár var alla það rýmir byggði Vara sannur nje sær nje svala Soltör sortna sigfollimar Körv av himni heiðar stjörnur Gæsar æmi við aldrna Bræður mun berjast og bönum verðast Månsystrångar sövi om spedla Skölvur Yggdrasils askstånd
And welcome, ladies and gentlemen, to GeekWatch, the one and only place where the good brothers and sisters of the holiest of holy temples seek enlightenment through drunkenness, craziness, batshitness, and just talking geek shit. I am your one and only gaming monk, better known as Mildra, and with me I've got four of my good brothers. We have the biggest head in Chicago, the bane of NPCs, and the foreman of the salt mine, now on off duty. Good brother Aaron. We have the living stack of comic books and the man who will fight you to the death over best girl. Good brother Doku. We have the man who is taking over your anime. Good brother Shades. And we have the CEO of Zadare Enterprises, bringing your brain at 10,000%. Yes, that is 10 times better than Zaya Enterprise. Good brother Xanatrix.
Hello.
That's never going to get old for me.
Nope, they neither.
We're still striving for 1,000,000%. Don't worry, we'll be 1,000 times better than Thouser.
Considering what we just saw tonight on our show, Tokarif's Live, yeah, I don't think that's going to be hard to do.
Oh man, he's setting the bar even lower? Damn it.
They tried to give him a redemption arc, motherfuckers.
You know what? You know what? Hold up. Yeah, drink for that.
I'm only gonna put this once. I'm probably going to. Now I might change my thought on that particular matter when the show finishes, but I can't help but get the feeling that I'm dealing with another Ducat situation.
Ducat?
Oh, Gul Dukat from Deep Space Nine.
Uh-oh.
What I mean by that is the great tragedy of Gul Dukat was that he was too good.
Yeah.
He was so good at being an effective villain, and that's something that Star Trek rarely had. I mean, how many outright true villains outside of Khan can you think of from that franchise? And
space.
Huh?
Space.
That doesn't count.
Space
You know
is
it.
Yeah.
I mean,
Hey, I have my dickish moments. I couldn't pass it up.
and the best I can come up with, the best I can come up with is the Borg up until the Borg Queen. Yes, I think the Borg Queen was a mistake. Maybe lore, but that's. I will freely admit I'm really stretching on that front. And even with that, a lot of those, in the case of the Borg, that was its own little bag of issues all on its own. But when it comes to, and I want to make clear, this is not the first time that I've said that kind of thing about a tokusatsu character, because there was another case where this kind of scenario happened a few years ago, Shades.
Yeah, I think we were talking about it during our show, if it's the character I think you're referring to.
Yes. The one who would call himself God.
Yep, that's exactly who we... Yep. The meme lord himself, God Dan Karoto!
Like,
For those of you non-Toku fans in the chat, yeah, Dan Karoto was such an exuberant character, and his actor was so over the top with his performance that when they originally planned to kill him off halfway into the series, but they brought him back just so he could continue being the true meme lord.
yeah, and when it comes now, Guy is not a meme lord, but you do have the same problem where he did his job as villain too well.
Yeah. He was such a dick and such an irredeemable asshole that now that they're trying to actually humanize him, it flopped hard.
And
Oh, I would love to serve on the Starship 4chan.
when it comes, and now Matt Wheaton's asking if we're going to talk mecha anime in the 80s. We'll think that over.
It's not out of the realm of possibility.
It's not
I know
out
at least
of the
a
realm
little
of
bit.
possibility, but it's best not to count your chickens just yet, considering we're just trying to find our feet with this show.
Yeah.
That being said, if you need an old school cartoon example of what I'm calling the Gul Dukat effect, I refer you to the original Mum-Ra.
Yes!
Okay.
Prime example. He was so over the top, so just in your face with his performance that when they originally planned to just kill him off at one point, but they just kept bringing him back to the point it got stupid.
Yeah. Now, something, a slight note before we get into the main topic, referring to Guy. His whole thing is, yes, now he's hit rock bottom and they're trying to put him through a redemption arc. And a lot of people, for whatever reason, dislike that, almost seeing it as if they're trying to forgive Guy, when they don't realize that redemption is the process you take to be forgiven, for one.
No. See, Xanatrix, I'm going to stop you right there, only because we literally just watched the episode where they tried to redeem him. The problem is they didn't set it up. It literally within one episode, like beginning of the episode, total asshole. Literally, they only had until the halfway point to try to redeem him, and they just bum rushed it.
And
Okay, so rushing I can agree with, but the story itself I understand what they're doing, and I like where they're going.
that's why I'm holding judgment on that until it's finished, so I can get a better context.
Yeah, full retrospect.
Because it could be that it's a fuck up now, but once I get all the pieces, it'll make a little bit more sense. Not going to say it's going to make all more sense. I'll get an idea for what was the plan. But we're getting ahead of ourselves. We'll probably have a chance. We'll probably have a chance to talk Toku in detail at a later date. Now, as you guys saw in the title, this week we are talking about PS1-era RPGs. Now you guys know I utterly despise the term JRPGs. And since there's some newcomers, I will take this time and explain why I don't like that term. And it's a few reasons. One, the term JRPG doesn't tell me anything. Like, I have seen Dragon Quest Monsters, Disgaea, and the Tales series all being referred to collectively as JRPGs. What do those three games have in common?
They are not turn-based, and they're basically completely different from what you would normally expect from the quote-unquote stereotypical JRPG.
Mm-hmm.
Putting aside turn-basedness, one of them's a roguelike, one of them's a tactics game, and one of them has a full-on action system. Two, the fact that I only started hearing the phrase JRPG from games media during the 7th generation, when there was that embarrassing pissing match between East and West.
Yeah.
Up until that point, when I was reading, and keep in mind, because of the arrangement that I had, I was reading like 4 or 5 different gaming magazines a month before I actively had internet. I was reading EGM, I was reading Game Informer because I need dessert. I was reading 1UP, and I was reading Tips and Tricks, and I was reading GamePro because I needed dessert after dessert. You know, like that. Like that whole. I often evoke that whole scene from Finding Forrester, which incidentally is one of my favorite movies. I read the Times for dinner. The Inquirer, that's my dessert.
Punch the key, for God's sakes!
Oh, that now, dog!
Well, and since you brought that up, Mildra, and I'm probably gonna get some pushback for saying this, but I'm gonna say it anyways. Going back to the era that we're talking about, especially when it comes to video games, yeah, RPGs, as far as the West is concerned, yeah, that's mostly miniatures and tabletop. But as far as the video game realm is concerned, at that time, almost all RPGs would qualify as a JRPG because Japan was the one that was doing RPGs in the video game format.
I'll probably have an opportunity to talk about the history of now. The third thing that I want to get on is that when I ask people, especially in the 2000s, when I would ask people to explain the term JRPG, I would end up getting a circular argument that would go something like this: it's an RPG from Japan. King's Field is from Japan. Does that count? No, it's got to be with a specific art style. Well, Satara Core has that kind of art style. Does that count? No, that game was made in the States. It's got to be from Japan. And it would just keep going on and on.
It's the same argument that they make for anime and what qualifies as anime, because Avatar: The Last Airbender qualifies as anime in my mind.
Well,
Yeah.
Here's the funniest part using sorry to cut you off, Aaron.
Alright.
Here's the funniest part, just using that argument of, oh, it's a JRPG. It has to fit this and this and this and this. Okay. Well, then what is Goblin Slayer?
Look, Goblin Slayer is what happens when TPK goes horribly wrong. Okay. I know that the creator said that he based it on his AD&D campaign. I don't believe him. I think he was playing BX because BX is notorious for being a bit on the brutish side.
Yeah.
You get my sorry again.
Go ahead.
You get my point here where okay, it's distinctively Western, it's distinctively D&D, it's distinctively anime. What is it? Does JRPG have to fit all of the... Can it just be an RPG? Like, why does it have to distinctively be
I want to add to your
JRPG?
point. I want to add to your point, though, Joe. Back when we're talking about the era here, we just called it RPGs because, like I said,
yeah. Go on, Aaron.
We just call it RPGs because, like I said, almost every one of these RPGs came from Japan because at that point the West was still in the doghouse for what happened in the 80s. But moving on.
Well,
moving on. Yeah.
Here's the terms. Here are the terms that I've come to use: console style and PC style, and I need to make clear as to why. And this is where I have to give a bit of a history lesson when it comes to the evolution of it. Now, you guys know that the PC Engine never really caught on in the States, but it did catch on a lot bigger in Asia and European markets.
Mm-hmm.
Like for example, you had stuff like the Konami MSX, which had the superior version of Metal Gear. The thing is that it all starts with wizardry. Wizardry, even though it had moderate success in the States, in Japan it became a much bigger deal, and eventually you would see stuff like the Black Onyx, which was basically a Japanese knockoff of wizardry, and that game would end up being used as the basis when Yuji Horii created Dragon Quest, because what his goal was with the original Dragon Quest was to have a wizardry-like experience, but streamlined for the Famicom, since Famicom is family computer. That's the reason why you have that first-person approach with battles, even to this day in Dragon Quest, is because of that origin all the way back from wizardry. It's the same reason you see that sort of maze-like approach with say the Megami Tensei or early Megami Tensei games and the core non-Persona ones, as well as the original Phantasy Star on the Sega Master System. Game design, much like anything else, is always going to follow this chain. And the thing is, Dragon Quest is, for all intents and purposes, the first console-style RPG, because because all of its design elements were made with consoles and that kind of general audience in mind. And the fact that Dragon Quest Day was a thing for several years bears fruit on that.
And I think
thought Dragon
that's
Quest
where
Day was still a lot of these days.
Yeah, and I think that's where a lot of this whole JRPG versus Western RPG started from, is because Japan popularized and pretty much perfected the console-style RPG idea, so people just said, oh, well, it's a Japanese-style RPG because that's what they did. Obviously, these days, that is such a loose term that it doesn't fit anymore, but back then, that's the mentality.
Yeah. Now, video game RPGs that are worse. Now, on the other end, what some people might call Western, I call PC style. Whether it be the SSI era D&D games, whether it be stuff like Planescape, whether it be stuff like the Elder Scrolls, or even more recent stuff like Divinity. And I know several of these have gotten ported to consoles, but their core frameworks are rooted in PC. Much like how the first-person shooters core framework is still, to a degree, rooted in PC, to the point where some people swear on mouse and keyboard to this day. Case in point, Ross from Accursed Farms, aka the guy behind Freeman's Mind.
And Freeman's Mind 2, which is still ongoing.
Yeah. Now, as far as the picture that you're seeing, this image started as a bit of a Twitter meme. The quest where we were told you had to pick 3 from this image, and I equated it to water torture.
Oh yeah.
You don't even need to tell me which image it is, and I already know what you're talking about.
Yeah. And because of that, that gave me the inspiration to do this. Our focus is going to be on PS1-era RPGs. However, I'm making a caveat. We are not talking about Final Fantasy VII. Other non-port Final Fantasy games are on the table, though.
Yeah, FF7. It's one of those. Even though it did open the West, open up the West to other RPG series. I'm looking at the horse right there. It's got black and blue arcs all over it. The whole thing's black and blue because it's been beaten to death.
Also, I forgot that we need to do something. Shades?
Yeah?
Exia is in the chat, so you know what's coming.
Oh yes! You done
Yeah! So, after you were explicitly told not to ask about a certain thing because of an NDA, and you asked anyway, oh, my dear friend, there's only one word for that. Dave!
You done fucked up!
Oh, no. Wait. We're going to go that.
Alright. Now, I feel like going in order with some of these, and we're probably going to diverge into others, but I want to start with Xenogears. Because,
oh, yes.
You mean the original Final Fantasy VII?
yeah, I know about that story, and if I get the chance, I'll probably do a deep dive into that later on. But
Oh, yeah.
now, Xenogears is I will make something very clear really early on, and some of you may have been able to pick up on this based on some of the games that I've said that I've enjoyed over the years. If you do something non-traditional with your approach to combat or with your approach to mechanics, you're already going to get my attention. And in the case of Xenogears, it was the fact that, one, they tried to minimize menu use, and two, the fact that when it came to doing attack systems, instead of just doing a basic attack, they went with a fighting game approach, which I thought personally was inspired. And of course, there's the fact that we had mechs in an RPG, which I want to make clear, it was several. Even though I was already familiar with mech games at this point, we didn't get them in this sort of traditional-ish RPG, because you think about because the closest that we had to mech games was stuff like Mech Warrior, all the different Gundam games, and yes, Front Mission. But Front Mission is a tactics game. Mech Warrior is a mech sim. It's a mech simulator. Is a full-on mech sim, to the point where I can't play it without a HOTAS.
Front Mission 1 was a tactics game. Front Mission 2 was a side-scrolling shooter.
Which is actually interesting. But for a lot of people, the peak was 3 with that one. But with Xenogears, you not only had that, you had it where you had spiky mechs instead of stompy mechs, as Brian Niemeyer calls it.
Yeah.
Like front missions mechs, the Wanzers, they're stompies.
Yeah, the Xeno franchise in general has always been known for its kind of out there designs. I mean, look at the more modern part of the franchise with the Xenoblade series. Like, if you've seen the blades in Xenoblade Chronicles 2, yeah, they can get pretty outlandish with the designs.
Yeah. Yeah, I personally like Xenogears because the plow is freaking weird. You got two nations fighting, and you got this fucking sky this sky civilization, and not Shevat, by the way, the other one, Solaris, basically pulling the strings. And the plot gets very complicated as the game goes on. But should we still stick with the good points, or should we talk about the elephant in the room?
Are you talking about Disc 3?
Yes.
Yeah.
This, in my opinion, is what keeps this game from being above legendary stats. I mean, it's good. Don't get me wrong. It's still a classic. But what keeps it from legendary status? Did you just run out of time or something?
Honestly, I think they did.
Oh.
Especially.
What you're talking about Disc 2 in Xenogears? Yeah, they didn't have enough time to finish.
Yeah. They didn't have enough time, they were instead of using CG cutscenes, they were using full on anime ones, and I'll have to look up what studio handled it, but I wouldn't be surprised if it was 4C because that was all they did for the most part. But animation, even in the shoestring era of the 90s, wasn't cheap.
Yeah.
I remember hearing that a single episode of Avatar: The Last Airbender cost about $1 million.
Oh my god.
I doubt the cutscenes in Xenogears were that expensive, but they couldn't have come cheap.
Yeah. Now, I know this will never fucking, along with a more complete version of Final Fantasy 15 or Metal Gear Solid 5. I know this will never happen, but we'll never get a director's cut of Xenogears. But one can dream.
Mm-hmm.
Well, the Xeno name's already been passed to Monolith Soft. I don't think Square could director's cut it if they wanted to.
Yeah, that's true.
So it's up to Monolith Soft, and if we can't even get a HD port of Xenosaga, I don't think there's a whole lot of hope on that front.
Well, I think it's really a licensing issue between the three companies. Square Enix still owns the Xenogears IP specifically, but they can't produce anything Xeno because they don't own the series anymore. The same with what was it, Tecmo? Or was it Bamco that did Xenosaga?
It was originally Namco and then Bandai Namco after the merger.
Yeah, Namco and then Bamco, and they don't have the Xeno series label anymore. They both own the original IPs for those games, but to do a director's cut, they'd have to get licenses from Monolith Soft.
We have a Star Trek situation with this one.
Yeah,
and it's interesting because usually in Japan that isn't a big issue. That's why you get games from Ban Presto covering all those mecha crossovers, because usually getting those licenses is really easy for each company because they all know they're going to make a buttload of money by selling it to the people in Japan.
Yeah,
that's true.
Yep. Moving past that, I think we can very much credit Xenogears for giving our younger selves a crash course in Jungian psychology.
Oh yeah,
A crash course for you? Yeah.
Especially when it comes to a certain purple-haired character.
Yeah.
Myung. Oh my word. What a mindfuck that character was.
Oh, everybody was. But I will freely admit that one of the main things that stuck with me when it came to Xenogears was the death blow mechanic, and
Yes.
and spoilers, the whole fighting game inspired motif. That's not going to be the last time that shows up tonight. But next, I want to talk about the one that actually did get a port, if you can find it. I have it, and that is Valkyrie Profile,
Ooh, I love it.
which was a lot more freeform than several of the others we'll be talking about today.
Yeah.
Now, as somebody who has deeply studied Norse mythology, I should be yelling at certain parts that deviate, namely gender swapping Freya.
Yeah, she has a brother for that.
Mm-hmm. and the fact that we have a Odin with 2 eyes.
Oh no, how did we get any of the runes?
Mm-hmm. But at the same time, it was a very nice crash course, and the fact that I keep seeing Lenneth's helmet design in so many other places kind of shows the impact that the game has. That being said, I do maintain that if you can get it, and I'm not giving you my copy of it, the PSP port of Valkyrie Profile is superior.
Let me guess why. Significantly less load times. Am I correct? I would tell you that.
Load time adjusted. When you have some much better looking cutscenes. Namely, you actually have some, and you've got some rebalancing to fix some of the bugs, and because of the fact that this was a Square port, and we know how this tradition goes, extra dungeons.
Oh yeah.
Oh yeah, more content because.
And on the other hand, you still have to deal with Tri-Ace's bad habit of, oh, you thought hidden bosses in a Square game were pain? Let me introduce you to Gabriel Celeste.
Oh boy!
And the Ethereal Queen.
Oh, we're gonna talk.
Anybody who's played a Tri-Ace game, you know how this shit goes down anytime you try and deal with an optional boss in one of their games.
Oh, we're gonna talk about. I think we'll talk. This isn't the last time we're gonna talk about Tri-Ace. Oh, wait till we talk about Star Ocean.
Yeah.
But
I do think they had an interesting approach with the use of the Einherjar and having the whole face buttons as attacks, even if it's just a shorthand version of, all right, time for the combat turn. Everybody bum rush. And let's address the elephant in the room. Arngrim is basically this game's version of Guts.
Yep.
Like, yes, Arngrim is a character in Norse mythology, and he is specifically a berserker, which doesn't help matters in the slightest. But there was definitely that, and I distinctly remember somebody using the sprites for Valkyrie Profile to make a fighting game called Valkyrie Fight. And because of that, got more use out of some Einherjar that weren't all that good in the main game, like June.
You know, every time you bring up Einherjar, it reminds me of a certain anime that came out in the last couple of years that, quite frankly, could go rot in hell.
Which anime is that?
The Master of Ragnarok and Blesser of Einherjar.
Yeah, the light novel's no good either. Don't worry about it.
Yeah, whenever I hear that term, I think of that anime and I want to punch myself in the throat.
I haven't seen that anime, so
you don't want to.
I'll take your word for it. But And of course, it did get a couple sequels. Even though I know some people wanted a third game that focused on Trieste. Honestly, I think it's for the best that didn't happen, simply because there'd be nowhere to go. There was the DS sequel, Covenant of the Plume, which on one hand, it was an interesting from the other side kind of take on it. On the other hand, holy fuck, that game was hard. Like, Covenant of the Plume, what it is, if you try to go with a pure no feather run, that game is going to kick your ass. But I will admit that when it came to Valkyrie Profile, I always find that particular game fascinating in the context of it, because the amount of actual branching paths when it comes to it, and the way the story can go multiple ways, wasn't something that we saw a whole lot of around that time. Like, a lot of times we just had a straightforward story, and while multiple endings had certainly been a thing, I wouldn't say multiple full-on story paths had been. I have to bring that kind of thing up because I know I'd open myself up to someone saying, "But what about Chrono Trigger? That had multiple endings." Yeah, it did. But I wouldn't say Chrono Trigger had multiple story paths in the same sense.
No, it just stopped at specific spots.
Mm-hmm. But then we get to the Breath of Fire games, and I'm going to say something a little controversial. 4 is better than 3. I know everybody sings the praises of 4 and the whole Dragon Gene system, but I honestly have my preferences towards 4. One, I do think it has a much better art style. 2, I did like the duality of storytelling that you had, where you're focusing on Ryu and his other half, Fo Lu. But I would rather have a dragon form that has a narrative place, instead of a dragon form that has a whole lot of palette swapping like we had with the gene system.
Yeah, I'm not saying that 4 is a bad game at all. It's not.
Mm-hmm.
But it to me personally, it wasn't as for me, it wasn't as memorable as 3.
Funny, because it's the exact opposite for me. I literally can't remember anything about 3 right now. But I remember, even, spoilers for a very, very old game.
Statutes passed. Don't worry about spoilers.
Ursula being, Dace. I remember that right off the bat when I hear Breath of Fire 4. Mm-hmm. I remember Fo Lu being the cooler person out of Ryu and Fo Lu.
Yeah. And I think it's more. I think with 3 and 4, it's more where you. I would say what. I'm trying to figure out how would you separate the taste from that. It's probably, on one aspect, it's the gameplay element, the whole Dragon Gene system. That's number one. And the second thing is coming. And when I first played through, it was actually the first RPG I played on the PS1. This is me coming from playing the first Breath of Fire in the past. So I would say, and a lot of the story of 3 connects to the first game. In all actuality, hell, the final boss in 3 was sort of the same one you fought in the first game.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah, because she's one of the 3 sisters.
Yeah, I would say that's probably why I connected with the game. Plus the music, I really love the music in 3. So
I saw you light up for a second. Were you about to say something, Shades?
No, I'm good.
I will admit I do have a bit of a soft spot for the whole playing half of the game as a kid, then the latter half as an adult. But because of the fact that Ryu is always going to be a silent protagonist, it's not going to have the same effect on me as it did playing an older character in, say, Final Fantasy IV.
Yeah. But if there's a game that I would like to replay one day, it is definitely Breath of Fire 4, because, like I said, it's one of those things where you might not appreciate it as much as you may not appreciate it then, but if you maybe on your second playthrough, it's like, hey, it's like, holy shit, how come I was blind to this back then?
Yeah. I will also Airshin. Just what the fuck? What the fuck was Airshin?
Airshin.
You remember the living tin can who was a little bit odd?
Oh, that spherical mech thingy in the fourth game.
Mm-hmm.
Oh, that's an interesting character design right there. It's like what happens if you made R2-D2 look more spherical instead of cylindrical?
And had him actually talk, because there's that whole running gag I've seen for years that R2-D2 is secretly a smartass.
I wouldn't doubt it.
Wouldn't argue the idea.
I think SF Debris had his own fun with that as a holiday special.
Excuse me, I got the wrong name for the right character in my mind. Urshin is the one who becomes Dace. Never mind. But what's funny is the only reason they called him Urshin in the game was so that you just weren't calling him Master all the time, which was his name in the original Japanese. Which I'd say that's a better name, because things like saying Master is always correct doesn't quite work. But then we come to what was probably the best action RPG on the PS1 at the time.
Oh, criminally underrated. Criminally underrated.
Yes.
I love Great Fencer Musashi, and the sad part is nobody ever talks about that game.
Yeah.
It was a great game.
Enemies with by tapping triangle endlessly.
Oh, the fusion.
Where you throw your wakizashi into them and steal their stuff. Yeah.
Yeah.
It was called Fusion, by the way.
Yeah.
Yeah, and when it comes now, putting aside the fact that we didn't get a whole lot of games with a day-night cycle, I have to wonder if that game was the inspiration for Morgana years later with Persona 5.
Oh God. Oh, you know what? You did mention Morgana. You know what that means, Shades.
What button do I need to hit?
Go to bed.
Oh yeah. Oh yeah. Where is it? Ah, here it is.
Remember, water is wet, a catchy likes pancakes, and 2 + 2 = go to bed.
But when it came to it, now, aside from the fact that I'm pretty sure maybe it's a blessing in disguise that this version of Musashi hasn't gotten an HD version, although maybe I'm wrong, but I could have swore it got ported onto the PlayStation Store, at least for PS3.
Yeah, it might have gotten sent to the PlayStation Store, but that's as far as it ever got. Mm-hmm. And of course, there's also the sequel, which
let's not talk about the sequel. We're having a good time.
yeah. I think that's why no one talks about Brave Musashi Brave Fencer Musashi because apparently this. I never played the sequel. I even barely even heard of the sequel, so it must have been that bad.
It wasn't bad. It was just uninspired and unimpressive.
Mm-hmm.
It was
pretty much.
It
took out a lot of the mechanics that the original was known for. The story was lackluster, and the animation was okay, but nothing to write home about.
Yeah.
So it's basically it suffers from this syndrome. It wasn't a bad game. It was just rote, and the problem was rote can be worse than a bad game in something.
Yeah.
Yep.
Yeah.
Especially,
exactly.
Especially when you consider that this is not Brave Fencer Musashi is not a game that you take seriously. I mean, after all, you're dealing with the Alukanite Kingdom. You know, all you can eat.
Yeah, like the food puns were everywhere.
You're basically serving the all you can eat kingdom against the thirst quencher empire.
And the reason why I'm somewhat glad that it's that I'm not seeing an HD version of this is because. And I mentioned this in the review I did this week, which was Vital Hearts versus Infinity's Edge. There has been a running meme for the last few years of taking certain stories from the past and retroactively making the joke that they're isekai. Hell, if you recall, during Metro Night Live, they did that with Sora.
Yes, I remember.
And because of that, I could easily see somebody making the argument for Musashi in this.
Sadly, it fits the bill.
Yeah.
It outright is isekai. He does. He fits it to a T.
He is a hero from another world coming to a fantasy world to save the day. It's a fucking isekai.
It doesn't help that the princess has a spell called Hero Summoning, and that's been the setup for several isekai over the years.
God damn it, no! I like isekai, but quit dating everything else!
Well, considering that this came before the glut of isekai light novels and video games and anime, maybe you could say that this is what started the ball rolling.
No, I'm gonna hurt you! No!
I'm sorry, but that's 10,000% not going to happen.
Excuse me? You want to try that? You want to test that theory?
Not going to happen. Zadari specs are better than Zaya specs at everything. You can't get through my armor. I've got plot armor!
That being said, I have to wonder what drug somebody was on to come up with the concept of Vambies. Part vampire, part zombies.
Oh, you mean Revenant?
Come on, that's genius.
It certainly is, but look, after my experiences replaying MDK, I've had to have my suspicions about certain game ideas over the years that somebody was on drugs, because if you've seen MDK, you'll know that game is drugs personified.
Understatement.
Someone was smoking too much jazz cabbage, and I think some of them got a little too hard on the wet.
Yep. Now that being said, I will admit that that I have to credit the power of Demo Disc for the fact that I even found out about Brave Fencer Musashi.
Same. Yeah. That's how I discovered it too. Good old PlayStation Underground, back when it was actually useful for something.
Yep.
I lived in a tiny little rural place in Oregon when I was growing up that had its own local video store. Most of my RPG stuff from the SNES and PlayStation 1 era was all from rentals and rent-to-owns from that place. I got, for example, the very first Breath of Fire for $3.
Nice.
And so I got introduced to some really, at the time, very esoteric games. because of just this tiny little video rental place that rented to own in most cases.
Yep.
Also, to answer your question about why MDK is a drug trip, it's made by Shiny Entertainment.
Oh yeah.
Earthworm Jim 2, Wild 9.
Mm-hmm.
So that's why MDK was a drug trip. It's shiny.
Shiny were the mad lads back then.
Yeah.
Now, I will admit that when it comes to the whole when it came to that whole Crest Guardian thing, I didn't realize it at the time, but they were basically doing the 5 books. even if they had to replace one for the same reason Shinkenger had to replace one of the names. Because Void doesn't exactly work. And seriously, can you imagine a Void Ranger Shades?
I could, and it would fit in with the Shinkenger naming theme. Shinku is vacuum or void, thus Shinku Shinken.
Yeah, try saying that 5 times fast.
Oh, by the way, there's something. There's one character there's one encounter in Musashi that we gotta talk about.
Kojiro?
No, not Kojiro. The boss fight against Topo. Yeah.
Fuck you. Just all of the fuck you.
Yeah. And of course, and the funny thing is, I didn't read those at the time, but I was like, "What the fuck? What kind of name is Topo?" It's like, is it kind of some from a toothpaste? And I realized later on it's a reference to Topo Shijo from the Ed Sullivan Show,
which explains why you get challenged to a dance contest.
Yeah, gotta love those American translators back at the time.
Yeah.
Although, when it came, and I had to double check this, but there were a few name changes that make the whole thirst quencher motif a bit more apt. The leader Flatsky, his Japanese name is Tequila.
Wait a minute. So you're saying in the Japanese version it's more like it's not much the third question empire, it's more like the drunkard empire, I would say.
Rutrick was named Bordeaux. I think Rutrick is a name he more deserves because he's an idiot. Bubbles and Ginger Ale, which were probably the most thirst quencher names in the U.S. version, were Liquor and Brandy.
Yep.
But Ed, Ben, and Topo's names didn't change
because they were a reference to the Ed Sullivan Show.
Yeah, they're all Ed, Ben, and Topo. Yeah.
Well, now you know. Next week on our show, the Bronze Age. Yeah, I can't do a good Ed Sullivan.
Yeah.
So the original name of the Thirst Quencher Empire, by the way, was the Ru Koaru, which is an anagram of Akoaru, or alcohol. They were literally the Ru Koaru Okok, or Teikok, excuse me, because it's an empire.
You mean the alcohol empire?
Yep.
Yes, they were literally the alcohol empire.
But next,
in other words,
and it wouldn't. I have to wonder if some of the people who came up with that idea would later on serve as consultants for a certain anime involving the King of Bandits.
Hmm.
But nobody else remembers Jang and his bird gun. So at least with that, the creator of that manga outright admitted that was the case.
So another thing is that the swords, the two swords that Musashi receives,
Yep.
rather than Fusion and Lumina, the large sword is Regando, which is a almost direct reference to the cave that Musashi lived in for a while.
Oh shit! You know what? You just realized that I made a snafu earlier. That large sword that I was talking to I thought it was Fusion. Yeah, it was Lumina. So
Yep. Lumina's the small sword used to absorb people, and its original name is it's one of the many words that translates to lightning, as in the name is just Lightning Maru. I think it's it's Raiko Maru. It's Raiko Maru, which is lightning as a name.
Which is definitely a name that I would expect to hear about a sword, but at the same time, I think that's one of those cases where the translators were more on point.
Oh, the ability was called assimilation, but do you want to know what it was originally called in the Japanese version, guys?
What?
Getto in, get in. It was katakana, getto in, and so it's just saying get in.
Yeah, I'm sticking with what I said.
yeah,
like if they wanted to use assimilation, that'd be assimilation. That'd be they could use gatai for one combine.
No, they couldn't get away with that. Toei would be on them like white on fucking rice.
No, gatai is a general term. They wouldn't be able to sue for that.
Oh, yeah, they wouldn't be able to sue, but Toei'd be given some dirty looks.
And not to mention, if Toei were giving dirty looks, they have to give dirty looks to all of Bandai.
Oh,
well, they worked
dirty
with
looks
Bandai.
to all of Sunrise.
Mm-hmm.
Okay, now that's different. Yeah,
because of all the combining mecha. So they don't have a monopoly on that word.
Yeah. Now next, and I've been waiting for a while for this one. It's time to talk about my favorite bit of Mad Lads who brought a bunch of my favorites to the States. Let's talk about working designs.
Working designs? Oh boy. Yeah.
Yeah, the guys who had more passion than they had common sense.
It's unfortunate that that's the case.
Now, I'll start off with the Lunar series, and I will admit something from the get-go. I actually got into the series backwards.
You got Eternal Blue first?
Yeah. I ended up getting Eternal Blue first, and then I got Silver Star Story. I know that both of them were originally on the Sega CD, which is why the PS1 versions are called Complete, because they're enhanced ports. But I didn't have a Sega CD at that time, and I'm pretty sure most of us didn't. Mostly because of the price point, and also because I think
you had to combine all the other stuff.
Yeah.
I didn't, but I shit you not, I had a friend in elementary and middle school whose mom bought him everything. He had the Genesis, the 32-bit add-on, he had that gigantic monstrosity. He had it.
I can only imagine what that'd look like when you see all that shit plugged in.
As an 11-year-old kid, that was fucking amazing. I was like, holy shit, it's like a giant robot, but a video game machine.
And I'm not knocking this. I'm not knocking the Sega CD. It definitely had its standouts, but Sturgeon's law applies, and the legacy of the Sega CD is still all the FMV shit.
Oh god.
The other legacy is Segata Sanshiro, though, when we got the Sega Saturn.
Oh yeah.
Yes, the original gaming monk.
No, he was a judoka. He wasn't a monk. You're okay. You're still the original gaming monk.
Yeah, but still. You better play Saturn, otherwise he's gonna judo throw your ass
and make you explode twice.
And he saved the world from a meteor, only for the Sega Neptune to fail, or the Uranus to fail.
Mm-hmm. But when it comes to Lunar, when it comes to Lunar 1 and 2, I will freely admit that this is one instance where it's held up by its story more than its gameplay mechanics, which I realize is a very odd thing to come from somebody like me, somebody who is very mechanically minded and tries to emphasize interesting game mechanics, mostly because most people don't. But the major appeal with Lunar was its story. Now, Silver Star Story did get a PSP port that, in my opinion, gave Null a better voice, so he doesn't sound like a chipmunk. The voice acting is decent in the complete version, but I'll be honest. Null's voice actor was the only one that I thought was kind of iffy, simply because Null sounded like a girl. I'll be flat out honest. Sounded like a really high pitched girl, and Null's a guy.
Yeah, they just compressed the voice of I believe it was a female voice actress to begin with, but I think they compressed the voice further to get the sense of this is a very tiny character across. Which
is understandable, but in my opinion, the PSP version had a better voice actor. I don't recall who it was, and I don't feel like digging through wikis to try and find that out. Jeez, where's Flutter when I need him?
He's in the chat last I checked.
I mean, if you want to dig through wikis, I can find out right now, actually.
Nah, don't bother. It's not worth the effort.
Yeah.
But
I think so.
I will admit that when it comes to the two of them, even though there's certain characters and the like that and certain story beats that I enjoyed in Lunar, I do think Lunar 2 is for the most part a superior story. And also, Lucia is best girl.
I think, I'm going to be honest, I think that's usually the general consensus I see among Lunar fans. It's not like saying Silver Star Story is a bad game. It's like comparing a 9 to a 10, is what I see most people say.
That said, if somebody is going to go with trying out Silver Star Story, find the PSP version or find a ROM of it and don't look back.
Yes. Yes.
Also, I know some people, and just in case somebody brings it up, but what about Dragon Song? We don't talk about Dragon Song.
We don't talk about the game that killed the series? Of course not.
No.
Yeah.
When it comes to the other thing is the one voice actor that I really want to find out who the one voice that I really want to find out who was behind it was Galleon, who you know how we roasted the idea of having the big bad have some sort of redemption in the form of Guy early on in this broadcast.
Yeah.
Galleon is a case of doing it right.
John Truitt.
I'm not sure if he's retired or not, but if I ever see him, I'll have to see about buying him a drink. But if that even is his name, because I know how it was back in the day with everybody doing pseudonyms.
Yeah.
It's what he was listed as in Summon Night 6 in 2016, so he's also listed in Growlanzer 2 in 2004 as John Truitt. And he was even the original English voice in the Sega CD versions as well.
Mm-hmm.
So I think he isn't one of those people who was hiding from the Screen Actors Guild. No, but he hasn't done anything since 2016, according to IMDb.
I will credit the Lunar games for my fascination with having dragons and to a lesser extent the Breath of Fire games with my fascination of having dragons as these almost pantheon-like beings. The only thing though, the outfit for the Dragon Master from 1, and it was not used in 2, thank goodness, is kind of lame.
Yeah, with the hat and everything.
Well, I don't mind the hat. It's the armor that I have a problem with.
I just think the hat doesn't look like it belongs on the rest of the armor, really.
Neither of them belong on each other.
Yeah.
You would, well, consider this kind of thing. You look at other cases where, if you look at certain characters in Tokusatsu, whenever they have an upgrade form, that's kind of a culmination of various elements.
Mm-hmm.
You usually see those elements reflected within it, whether it be something as ridiculous as Wizard's Drago Timer, or even the living kaleidoscope that is the extreme memory.
Hey, I like that point. Thank you.
I like it too. I like it too. But the point is, with those sort of upgrades, you can see some sort of visual element of what came before.
Well, the two most extreme examples of that are Build and Zio, actually. Build has literally all 60 full bottles plug into him.
Ugh, I hate that form.
And for Genius. And then, of course, Zio, well, he's literally covered in shrines to
every previous form, every previous writer, it gets silly.
It's silly as hell.
I've heard rumors that the inspiration for Grand Zio was a temple in Tibet. Which
I can believe it based on the thing that pops up when he's standing by the henshin.
Mm-hmm. Yep, looks like Thousand Armed Cannon reimagination.
Yeah, but with the Dragon Slayer armor in Lunar, it's brown plate armor.
It's gray.
Yeah.
Yeah, and it's gray and black with red banding. That's all it is.
How do you get that from the combination of gifts between a red, blue, black, and white dragon?
I can see how you'd get the gray from the white dragon, and the red and the black from the banding, but there's no blue. No, there is one place where the blue is. The blue is in the crystal on the head, on the center of the forehead of the stupid ass looking hat.
Yeah, I'm sorry. That's stretching harder than Reed Richards being drawn and quartered.
Thank you. I love that joke. I'm going to use that from now on. Let me check what the Blue Dragon gift was.
Especially when you consider the elements involved. You have a white dragon using ice, I believe the blue dragon used water, the red dragon, of course, using fire, and the black dragon using gravity. I will freely admit that Lunar starts out pretty standard up until Disc 2, whereas Lunar 2 it makes its narrative presence known a lot earlier than that.
Well,
go ahead.
Yeah, I was going to say, just a side note here. The helmet is the Blue Dragon's gift, so having a blue gem fits thematically, even though the rest of the helmet is red with white and black banding.
Yeah, I maintain what I said.
Yeah, it's yeah.
Which is why I consider it a good thing that the sequel, even if naming your titular character Hero is a little bit on the nose, does a lot better of a job. Also, I think Hero and Ruby had a much better dynamic than Alex and You
mean Alex and Luna?
Yeah. No, I have to go with the dragons in this case.
Oh, that's true.
As for putting aside the whole fact that they had to give into temptation and do some sort of bathhouse scene, even if it was a case of Lucia had no idea what she was doing.
I like the fact that both games are filled with bromides you can get in the complete series. Bromides for every character.
And one of them got Jean really pissed off.
Yep.
Jean I think had one of the. I will admit something. I'm a sucker for that particular style of redemption arc, and it doesn't help that I ended up getting that a few years after I got Lunar 2, I ended up getting Final Fantasy Chronicles, which meant I got to see Cecil's redemption arc for that time and the whole class change. And that's why in some of my own work, whenever there's a major narrative change, I will make sure it's reflected mechanically. Shades, you may recall one instance of that with Maddie's character during the Enemy Within campaign, where he went from a pit fighter to a knight.
Yeah.
I couldn't do something like that for the others because it just wouldn't narratively fit. Like you were always going to be the guy with the pistols, and in Warhammer's setting, it is physically impossible for a human wizard to jump into a different branch of magic. Like anytime that somebody tries, it's either chaos involved or they go crazy.
True. Side note: Flutter did say that for the third iteration of Silver Star Story, the PSP Silver Star Harmony, the voice for Null was Spike Spencer, so he got downgraded to Shinji.
Ugh. No, I don't think that's fair because first off, a memo to Japanese parents: never name your kid Shinji. You're just asking for trouble.
Oh man, I think there was actually less names of Shinji after Evangelion than before. I mean, the only Shinji I know of that's semi-famous is Shinji Mikami.
Oh, we know another one, but he's no better. Mm-hmm. Shinji Kito.
Who? I don't know who you're talking about.
Oh, fuck you.
I don't know anything you're talking about.
Don't lie to me, asshole!
There's only Shinji Mikami. What are you talking about?
No, like putting aside the whole Shinji thing with Spike Spencer. He has better roles in his repertoire over the years.
Yes, this is true, but most people still remember him as the whiny little 14-year-old bitch boy who wouldn't get in the goddamn robot.
Although, to his credit, I think even he's not a big fan of that role.
He isn't. I don't think Spike Spencer liked that role.
Because there was that infamous rant that got leaked after the final episode was recorded.
Mm-hmm. I am very sure he did not like that role.
No. And I'm trying to think. I'm trying to think if it was him or somebody else who decided who forced me into that running gag about Crispin Freeman with the Noeen outtakes.
Mm-hmm.
I think it was him. That's because of the whole Crispin Freeman, get out of my bedroom. But even with that, there were plenty of other things that working designs had their hands in when they were actually able to put things out, because there was that running gag for years of working delays. There was of course Growlancer, but that was mostly a PS2 experience for me, so I'm not going to cover it here. But one that I was introduced to, even though I technically already knew about it because of its anime adaptation, was Arc the Lad, which, technically speaking, is the first PS1 RPG. And what is really funny is the fact that there were magazine snippets that were calling Arc the Lad the Final Fantasy of the PlayStation.
I remember that. I remember that really well, actually.
Mm-hmm.
And
Jesus.
Are we talking? Let me guess. It came out like sometime in like 95 or 96 when they were.
Yeah, we're talking first wave shit with the PlayStation when it came to Arc the Lad. Now, those of you who are fans of ADV's dubs, like myself, may remember the Arc the Lad anime, which is a pretty straightforward adaptation of the second game.
yes.
It is technically, the game is technically in the realm of a tactics RPG, and not trying to brag or anything, but I still have my copy of the collection, which I'm pretty sure I could sell for a pretty penny if I so desired. And that thing was fucking packed, because that had all 3 games and that arena side game that was a companion to 3. And
Okay, and I'm reading here. Yeah, the first 2 Arc the Lad games came back in the PS1's infancy.
mm-hmm.
Yep.
Which is around 95 and 96.
So it's understandable why people would make that comparison, especially given that it was pioneering the whole CG cutscene kind of thing. But it's one of those funny in hindsight kind of things.
Yeah, back in a second.
All right. But beyond that, there were a few rail shooters that Working Designs had put out. But of course, their main claim to fame during the PS1 era was the Lunar games.
Yeah.
Now, the next one, Legend of Legaia, is one that I find gets overlooked quite a bit. And this one was
Legend of Legaia and Legend of Legaia 2 are both really good games.
They're both really good, and I still have my copy of both. And they kind of pioneered the idea of introducing fighting game mechanics into RPGs.
Yeah. I think it was probably the first one, or at least the first popular one. I'm not sure if it was the very first one.
I know that it beat out Xenogears by a few years.
Yes.
But when it came to the first game with the whole Saru concept, I think that was definitely an interesting approach, especially since as your Saru leveled up, you would see it go further and further along your arm.
The Rasaru,
mm-hmm.
yeah.
Mm-hmm. And now, granted, there are some games that are on this because of the strength of their mechanics, and there are some games that are on the strength of their story. Legend of Legaia is a case of the former. And this is why whenever there's been the debate about story versus mechanics, I always say anybody picking one side or the other is seeing the forest for the trees.
You're missing the forest for the trees.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah.
Oh, go ahead.
I was going to say, I actually have to agree with that. I remember playing Legend of Legaia, and I remember how fun it was to play. I don't remember the story.
I do remember that a lot of it involved the whole Saru corrupting and the like, but it was a pretty straightforward kind of story. The only other thing was the fact that you had that one of the characters involved, and this was one of those games that the cast stayed really small. Was basically raised out in the woods and didn't know any better.
Mm-hmm.
Which is always a amusing concept when done right.
I Real quick, guys, I'm gonna go ahead and head out early, only because I realize now that I have very little to say on all of this.
No worries, man.
All right, I'll catch you guys next time. Have a good night, everybody.
Good night. Stay frosty. But next we get to the one game that, and I'm pretty sure Shades will will give me the stare for saying this. Okay, enough pussyfooting around. I'm gonna go out and say it. Luca Blight is a better villain than Kefka. There.
I would say that Luca Blight is a more fleshed out villain than Kefka. That's true.
Now, granted, calling him Luca Blight is a little bit on the nose.
On the nose.
But the thing that puts him over the edge for me is when it comes to Kefka, there is a kind of excuse when it comes to his insanity. He was a part of an experiment that went wrong and slowly drove him crazy. Luca, on the other hand, yeah, he did have a trauma. He did have that trauma at a young age, but I'd say what ended up happening after that completely exceeds any sort of excuse that could make. Because Luca is fucked up.
My only argument would be that I don't know what criteria you mean by better villain, because at least Kefka wins, and the entire second half of the game is you cleaning up your fuck ups.
There's certainly that, but the big problem that I have when it came to Kefka is the fact that, as amusing as he's basically a fantasy version of the Joker. And it's more of the fact that what makes him work are things around him rather than his specific actions for the most part. Putting aside the whole world destroying thing, up until that point, he for a large portion of Final Fantasy VI, he's not really the main antagonist.
Which is actually good. It meant that most people playing that game for the first time didn't see him coming from behind like that.
On one hand, there's definitely that. On the other hand, the whole destroying the world thing that he does.
And I'm back.
As time has gone on, I've kind of found that to be like a shock moment. Like I'm more invested in. I think the reason I'm more invested in a character like Luca is because of the fact that we see very clearly how far he's willing to go, and
I think the other difference might be that the limitations of the two platforms. You could do more with the PlayStation 1, and so exploring Luca Blight's offenses was much easier. We do see what Kefka is willing to do in FF6. He poisons an entire castle city.
Yeah.
Hey guys, are we talking about Suikoden?
Yeah.
Yes, we're at Suikoden 2.
That guy.
And
yes, we are at an excellent RPG series. I love the Suikoden games.
I have a complicated relationship with the Suikoden series. Now, first off, let's address the obvious point. The reason why we have 108 characters all the time is because Suikoden is the Japanese name for the water margin, one of the 4 pillars of wuxia fiction.
Yep.
And yeah, I'm probably going to get somebody roasting me about my bad Chinese pronunciation. I don't give a fuck at this point.
Well, Suikoden is the Japanese reading of those characters anyway, so it wouldn't matter.
People have gotten on me for how I pronounce wuxia, how I pronounce chi, how I pronounce tea, how I pronounce Tiansha. Like, I don't care anymore.
Not going to get on your case. I'll pronounce it the way I've learned it, and you pronounce it the way you know. That's all it is.
I do the best I can. I do the best I can, and if that's not enough, that's not my problem. But
Exactly.
the thing that always held me back when it came to the series, and this was not a new problem with me. This was a problem I had for the longest time. Is the fact that I do not have a high opinion of the Vancian spellcasting system. I don't like it in D&D. I
Yep.
didn't like it in any of the D&D PC games. I didn't like it in Final Fantasy 1 and 3, and surprise surprise, those are the only Final Fantasy games that did it. And I don't like it in Suikoden.
I don't think the Final Fantasy 3 DS remake did it. I think they went back to MP.
No, it did.
Oh, did it really?
Mhm.
Oh. I never played the DS remake.
Yeah, the DS remake of 3 still used that system. They don't call it spell charges. They tried to call it MP, but a spade was a fucking spade. And Suikoden with the rune system has used that mechanic, and I am of the opinion that it doesn't fit. When you look at the style of fantasy that Suikoden has been, with this mix of European and Asian motifs, and a very high magic approach where you could buy runes in literal shops, i.e. the sole reason that you'd keep Jean around. The shop, having those sort of shops is putting it squarely in the realm of high fantasy. That spellcasting system, I was willing to put up with it in, say, the original Final Fantasy, because of what Final Fantasy was drawing its influences from. I'm not so willing to do that with Suikoden because enough time had passed since.
Yeah, I get it.
And even, I know that the DS game tier crease is controversial, but I'll defend it to a degree for the fact that it just used an MP system instead of using the whole charge thing. Because the thing about doing those sort of charges, especially in a video game, is it makes you want to play defensively. Which would be perfectly fine if there weren't a significant amount of characters that were geared towards magic.
Yeah, that kind of kills it for you.
Like if this was a case where the emphasis was supposed to be on a melee, I might be able to buy it. And also there's the fact that in the early Suikoden games, with 1 and 2 especially, there was a case of RNGesus with certain runes where they could have a failure rate and backfire.
Oh god. As I mentioned yesterday, RNGesus does not save.
No, he just fucks you. But there's one thing that I will give that I've always given the Suikoden games credit for, especially in comparison to its contemporaries then and now, and that is weapon variety. Consider the main weapon that we often see, the main weapon archetypes that we often see in RPGs.
Sword, spear, bow.
Yep, sword, spear, bow. Usually with sword,
Axe.
it's sword and board, and that's boring as fuck. Sometimes you might get an axe if you're lucky. But Suikoden 1, main character uses a bow. Well, a bow staff. Let me rephrase myself. 2, tonfas. Even though the pommel looks kind of funny.
Yep. Rokushaku and
yeah.
Tonfa.
I think 3, you had a knife.
Kniff.
4, long sword and short sword. 5.
Oh, so Italian fencing. Got it.
Yeah. 4 gets a lot more shit than it deserves, honestly.
That's true.
5, a Sansetsugon. Or a 3-section staff.
Yep.
Oh.
And that's not getting into the variety of weapons that the rest of the cast has access to.
The variety of weapons that the rest of the gigantic cast.
Yeah, cast of hundreds.
Remember, 108 Stars of Destiny.
Yeah, because it's the water. It's it's based off one of the 4 pillars, as you mentioned earlier.
Yeah. For those who don't know, the four pillars are if you're delving into wuxia fiction, these are the 4 books that you need to read. Journey to the West,
Which is the most well known.
Mm-hmm. Although there's debate about whether or not it counts as a wuxia piece.
It does. It was written by the author who pioneered wuxia in ancient China.
Yeah.
So it's part of wuxia.
Yes. Dragon's Heaven's Sword and Dragon Saber.
Mm-hmm.
The Water Margin. Apparently, another translation of the name is All Men Are Brothers.
Can be, yeah.
And,
there's usually 2 to every name with them.
And Romance of the Three Kingdoms.
The second most well known, yeah.
Mm-hmm.
It's really a tie with Journey and Romance. Usually, Journey is more recognizable to younger people because they're somewhat peripherally aware of Sun Wukong because of Son Goku in Dragon Ball.
Mm-hmm. Well, that, and when it comes to Dragon Ball, that originally was going to be a reimagining of Journey to the West, but Toriyama forgot.
It got away from him. Remember that Toriyama gets ideas and he just wants to keep writing them.
Yeah, the guy has scatterbrain issues, so yeah.
Remember, there was even a point where he wanted to put baseball into DBZ. So, but that's a little off topic. But yeah. Those 4 books are the four pillars of ancient Chinese wuxia. I believe they're all from the same author too.
Yeah, and Game Fan saying as for Romance play Dynasty Warriors, I'd actually say you'd be better served playing the Romance of the Three Kingdoms game. Because Dynasty Warriors is a spin-off from that game series, since they're both made by Koei.
Koei Tecmo, yay!
Yeah, I've never played any of the Romance of Three Kingdoms games, but like I said, the Dynasty Wars is basically the Cliff Notes version of it.
It's not even the Cliff Notes version because nothing in Dynasty Warriors makes any sense. It's hey, let me take these Cliff Notes and then kind of sort of put them together in a way that makes sense from a language structure, but not makes sense from a story structure.
Yeah. And so they got slightly better at it when they started doing better pronunciation and also bring in Jin, because Jin wins, lol. But that actually brings me to another instance. There was one Journey to the West adaptation during the PS1 era. It was actually really late in it, and decided to translate the transformation motifs as were beasts for some reason. And it was simply called Sayuki Journey West. It was basically a tactics RPG. Pretty much. It didn't change the formula a whole lot besides the transformation thing I mentioned. But when it comes to the other thing, when it comes to Suikoden is the fact that I think this was the earliest instance we had of actually putting importance on formation tactics in battles. I mean, we kind of had that in Lunar, but I didn't really use it all that much. because it didn't really matter. But it definitely matters in the Suikoden series. The only unfortunate part is trying to get a hold of a copy of Suikoden 2 is fucking hard. Like, if you want to get that, you got to break the bank. Or just go with a ROM if you want to go that route. But the first one did get put on the PlayStation Store. I do remember that. I have that. But 2 never did. Kira's saying, is like Panzer Dragoon Saga hard? Yeah, close enough. I think Panzer Dragoon Saga is going to be harder, but that's a fair approximation. And Doku and Xana are for some reason muted.
Uh-oh.
I muted myself because I'm eating.
Ah.
I didn't want to get chewing sounds into the stream.
No, we do not do mukbang here in the watch.
Oh yeah. I don't see Foodie Beauty anywhere here.
Yeah, I'm just eating a very, very late dinner, that's all.
Yeah. But next I do want to cover Parasite Eve a bit, and because Parasite Eve is as far as with it and its follow-ups is an example of what happens when you don't stick to your guns.
Oh yeah. I mean, now before anyone says, I'm gonna defend Parasite Eve 2 a little, because that game, let's just say Square let's just say gave it the old college try with the survival horror deal with Parasite Eve 2, and it somehow did work a little. But yeah, if one thing is known about the Parasite Eve series is they have consistency issues, and they didn't pay for it until, oh god, must I? You know what? I'm not going to even mention that goddamn abomination.
For me, the whole appeal with a game like Parasite Eve was taking aspects of role-playing games and putting it into the framework of a survival horror game.
Yeah.
That's why I consider Parasite Eve 2 to yeah, it definitely tried, but going full real time, I think hurt it. And the other thing that most definitely hurt it was the fact that so many of the maps were a lot more confined as far as your movement. Like when you look at the movement for a lot of the encounters in the original Parasite Eve, you had plenty of wiggle room.
Oh yeah.
You didn't have as much of that in 2. Which now some might argue that that was them trying to have it be more amenable to people who were playing Resident Evil. I think that was a mistake.
Oh yeah.
Especially when you consider that with Resident Evil, the options that you're going to have during encounters, one, you want to try and avoid encounters when you can, and two, encounters have less options in a Resident Evil game compared to what Parasite Eve was having. There's also the fact that I think trying to make it survival horror was a bad idea. I think with Parasite Eve 1 and 2, it should have been advertised as just a horror RPG.
Yeah, because
well, there were still some survival mechanics to it. You did have limited resources.
Yeah, you did.
The first one, it was more of an ARPG. And
even with all the big thing for me is the map design that I think gave 1 the advantage over 2. You've got a lot more. you've got a lot more room to breathe. And this is also the reason why, as you guys know, the one way to piss me off when it comes to maps and shooters is when you make the map areas, especially where firefights are going to happen, very confined.
Oh yeah.
Whether it be through invisible walls or just way too many choke points, you need room. You need room to breathe. This is the reason why you have the maps open up with, say, Doom 2, compared to its predecessor. Now, granted, at that time it was also the thing that they understood the engine that they were using better, but I digress. And yeah, Derek Alexander did cover the Parasite Eve games, but I do have two dock points on him for one thing. He didn't mention that the Parasite Eve game we were all playing is technically a sequel.
Technically.
Mm-hmm.
What was the sequel that we've been playing with Parasite Eve?
The first game is a sequel to a novel of the same name.
Oh yeah, that's right. Where basically because of the novel, it explains the whole backstory with the mitochondrial Eve and how that cell somehow got to Japan or something.
Yeah, and how that particular the Eve in that particular approach ultimately was a failure.
Yeah.
Yeah, it didn't turn Tokyo into like some sort of some big ass biomass of like gelatin, like what happened in Parasite in the game.
Mm-hmm. But I've read the book. It's actually a pretty decent horror story. I wouldn't say it falls into the realm of some of the things people expect from Japanese horror, but it's a serviceable story. I know it got adapted into a film. I have not seen the film, so I can't comment on that.
Yeah. Also, for those that played the first game, well, yeah, you could say the thing is a little bit linear, and pretty rote. But if you really think that, I got two words for you: Chrysler Building.
No. I'm not going back. I am not going back to the Chrysler Building.
The Chrysler Building, but why not?
I hate you.
The Chrysler Building is torture, and it's one way to get there. And actually, it's where you get there. We face the real final boss of the game.
Mm-hmm.
Yes, I'm well aware. But
Chrysler Building is pain.
Not really. Side note. Actually, since we're talking about PS1 era RPGs, this is actually a good point. A good place to point this out. Are we okay with shout-outs to smaller creators on here, Monk?
Yeah.
Okay,
yeah, I'm
so
fine with that.
A Let's Player who does a lot of classic RPGs. H.C. Bailey actually did a run.
Oh, H.C. Bailey! I love that guy.
Yep. He's actually my favorite LPer on the site. He's only got 8,000 subs.
Mm-hmm.
This guy, yeah, I wouldn't say he's a smaller YouTuber, but
have you seen
how he's been around for a decade?
Yeah.
This guy's been around for a decade. And I don't understand why he has 6-figure subs.
Why he does? Yeah.
This guy is very meticulous with his gameplay when it comes to RPGs. In fact, right now
he's at 96k subs. Yeah.
Oh, so it is about 100,000. Finally, jeez, it took like what 10 years. But anyway, but right now he's redoing Final Fantasy 2, because his first playthrough, he admitted, was a bit janky. Because he always kept getting ambushed. He didn't understand the mechanics correctly. but this one, let's just say he keeps getting preemptive strikes and shit. It's freaking amazing.
Yeah, he's doing a rerun of this game because he finally has a whole bunch more information, especially years after he first attempted it. H.C. Bailey's whole thing, just as a quick rundown, he is a completionist. He tries to get 100% of everything, and if he doesn't do it on screen right in front of you, he'll do it in a one-off side, either a small side portion or its own side episode. Because
and every time the reason he does it because I have to satisfy my OCD.
Yep. And then the other thing is he also does it in such a way that people can play along with him. Like if you want to play the game as he is playing it, you can do everything he is doing and you will have near to the same results. He wants to make it entertaining and he wants to make it complete. So he actually does 2, 3, sometimes 4 or 5 pre-runs of these other games while he's making his current series. And he's very, very meticulous. He has his own forums that he has other people help him, maps, data mining, all this sort of stuff. And his community is probably the most wholesome LPer community on the site.
This is in my opinion, he it's like him and James Rolfe are basically that. It's basically the RPG equivalent to James Rolfe,
except not nearly with the same sense of humor. His humor is very
niche.
If you wanted to say it, it'd be the RPG PG version of James Rolfe, because he usually doesn't swear. When he does, it's a precision F strike. His entire TV tropes page covers this, and so. And the one time Retsu Pure had him on, or lambasted him, the response from their own fans, not just the fans of H.C. Bailey, but from Retsu Pure's own fans, Slow Beef and them, was, why are you picking on this guy? Like, legit, nobody could understand why they were picking on H.C. Bailey.
Yep.
Yeah, you do. Yeah, basically, you don't. Yeah, don't leave H.C. Bailey alone. Like, he's a good guy.
Yeah.
Now, when it comes to the other thing that I can't help but find kind of amusing is that the strongest weapon in Parasite Eve, if you decide to hack it, was the SMG.
Yeah, the SMG was pretty overpowered.
Mm-hmm. But when you consider how the SMG is treated in shooters, that's always going to be funny to me.
Well, and the big thing about the SMG though in Parasite Eve is it makes perfect sense. The SMG is meant to be a mid to close range suppression weapon, and you're always mid to close range in that game.
Which is also the reason why I'd say most of the firearms you have in it are I don't think you've got a single instance of a full-on long-range weapon because it's not designed for it. And in the case of 2, well, 2 was too claustrophobic to be able to utilize that kind of firepower. Now it's before I get to the next one, there is one game that's not on this list that I want to talk about because it is a nostalgia bomb for me personally, and that's why when there was that Kickstarter for a piano cover album, I ended up backing that shit. I need to talk about Chrono Cross.
Oh, I love
it. Yes.
And Well, it can be argued that Trigger has the better story. Chrono Cross and Final Fantasy VIII, and I mention them because I got them in the exact same week, have a much bigger impact on me as a games critic and a wannabe game designer. And the reason being is that both of them made me rethink things that I didn't care for. For example, I mentioned before that I don't care for the whole spell charge things. Cross and 8 are exceptions to this rule. And the reason they're exceptions is because of the fact that that it is not as restrained. Like the big problem with the whole charge thing is that the main way to get it back is a 8-hour rest or sleeping at the inn or sleeping at a tent, what have you. In 8, just draw. And in Cross, aside from consumables, you're always going to get your elements back. You just can't use them more than once during combat.
You can only use them once per battle.
And in the case of Cross, we had it's technically a combo system, but in a different sense. And yeah, the dual and triple techs aren't as frequent as they were in Trigger. But I really, really liked the element grid.
The element grid was fun.
It gave an actual purpose, an actual dichotomy between melee attacks and magic attacks. Because of the whole light, medium, and heavy thing, where it actually showed you the odds of hitting, and there would be a reason to want to try and risk it, not just for damage, but also because you would get access to higher tiers within the grid. And lastly, of course, the music.
Yeah, the music was actually really good. I like what they tried to do with Chrono Cross. I'm just sad that it didn't. It just didn't get the same gripping feeling that Trigger had.
Well, actually, I personally thought the music. Well, Chrono Trigger does have a legendary soundtrack. I think Chrono Cross, at least meets it, if not exceeds it. Because hold on, let me go ahead.
Don't play any of the tracks.
Okay, never mind. Because
we don't want to get ourselves in too much trouble here.
Yeah, but I would recommend most of you go when you go on after the stream, go on YouTube and search for for 2 tracks, the Chronopolis is track and People Seeds with Life.
Mm-hmm. The other thing, and I have to wonder if this was a seed for 10 a few years later, is the fact that a lot of the visual aesthetic within Chrono Cross is significantly more colorful than some of its counterparts, and there is a very tropical feel with a lot of its motifs. Putting aside the fact that a major element in both it and in 10 is water. And it certainly doesn't hurt that once again we have the whole weapon variety, because you've got somebody using a double-bladed staff in the form of Surge.
Yep.
And briefly using that big ass sight, not that big ass one-handed sight that Link's had.
Briefly. Unless, of course, you go for some very specific paths through the game, in which case you can just kind of stay as Link's forever.
Mm-hmm. Not entirely. Which, as interesting as it was to have Magus join you in Trigger, I like the whole idea of being as Link's for the brief time that you did, because it did mean that you had to change up your strategies because you were dealing with a completely different elemental affinity.
Yep.
Also, I have a soft spot for Salt and Pepor and Ketchup. You take that route.
Yeah, I remember.
I think Ketchup was our first introduction to the concept of I will beat a motherfucker with another motherfucker.
Yeah, probably one of them.
Mm-hmm. Since in that particular boss fight, one, we can see why everybody else is so scared of Ketchup, and two, midway through the thing, he uses salt and pepper as clubs.
Yep.
But now I will admit that that some of the connections that Cross tries to make with Trigger, some of them are a little bit weak. I honestly feel like Cross should have been its own game completely.
Especially since we didn't get Radical Dreamers, which was supposed to be the bridging game between the two.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah.
The other factor is that, and I think we eventually got a rough translation of Radical Dreamers, but it would be for several years.
It got C&D'd as well.
Yeah, because of course it did. Look, if you're not going to bring it, I think there should be a kind of unwritten rule that after about 10 years, if you have no plans on actually doing anything with it, just put it out in the open. Let the fans deal with it. You know,
I think I think that's a good mindset to take, but I think that Squeenix is more concerned with the fact that if they did, that would also open up basically all of the Chrono franchise for people to play around with in open territory.
Mm-hmm.
So it's just like when Bethesda went after Mojang for Scrolls.
Well, in the case of the Mojang thing, that was going to be dead in the water, honestly. Simply because of the genericide clause.
Oh yeah.
Yeah, because it'd be too generic for it to be considered a trademarkable name. But even then, the fact that Bethesda didn't even really want to go after them, but they knew they had to, otherwise it would open up a crack in their already large hold on Scrolls being in their trademark names. So that's why that happened. So I'm guessing that's the same reason that Squeenix continues to pursue C&Ds on things that are old and not in use anymore, is to make sure that other people can't take them and destroy them and then also destroy the name of the originals.
Mm-hmm.
Like they can always make another game though, but that's a little too much to ask apparently for them.
Honestly, I think that might be for the best, because there's not a whole lot of avenues that you could really take the Chrono series.
Yeah, when you think about it, in a Chrono Cross, well, again, it's a great game, but they kind of wrote themselves into a corner with that one.
Chrono Cross dealt with divergent timelines.
Yeah, it did, but at the end of it, there's again I'm not saying that there's nowhere they could have gone. It's just that the places that they could go are significantly bottlenecked.
Yeah, there was. I mean, I understand. I mean, there was. I mean, I do want there were a lot of people want another game, probably because there was so many plot holes. It was like Swiss cheese between Trigger and Cross.
When it comes to that, to be quite honest, I would rather have a plot hole than have that plot hole filled in badly.
Yeah, that's true. Yeah, because you can easily have plot holes become a complete cop out, like what Volition did to Saints Row with the whole Dex thing. But yeah, sometimes. So you're basically saying it's best to leave it wide open instead of being filled with some cop out plot trying to shut the fandom up.
Yep. Now, the next one that I have to cover is one that is most definitely near and dear to my heart, and one that has kind of gotten screwed over the years because of bad release timing. That is the Wild Arms series.
Oh yeah,
good old Wild Arms.
Now, it did get an anime adaptation, but Twilight Venom and the Wild Arms series have absolutely nothing in common with each other.
Oh God, what does Twilight got to do with fucking Wild Arms?
No, it was them. Twilight Venom. It was them being cute with the idea of it calling it Wild Arms TV.
Oh God,
But
that's stupid.
now, when it comes to the first game, I'm gonna make something very clear. Go with the PS2 remake and don't look back.
Yeah, I heard stories about the original release. A mess.
It was there was the whole mess issue. Two, if I recall correctly, Wild Arms came out a few months before Final Fantasy VII.
Oh,
Let me check.
I know. And yes, Homer, we are talking about that. And also, before I get too ahead of myself, welcome Veroxid to the madness.
oh yeah.
Um,
At least the series did get better. I consider. Well, it got better. I think Wild Arms 2 and Wild Arms 3, I think, are probably the pinnacle of the series. I haven't played 4 and 5 though. To be fair.
Wild Arms 1 released literally 1 month before Final Fantasy VII.
Oh,
It was December 20th, 1996. Final Fantasy VII was January 31st, 1997.
oof.
So yeah, Wild Arms came out. It was doing really well for a little while, and then the big name got dropped on the auction block, and it kind of got lost in the gutter and forgotten.
yeah. Now, the funny thing with adapting Wild Arms into anime is Wild Arms 1 through I'd say 1 through 5 had this amusing little thing where whenever you loaded up your save, a cutscene would play as if you were watching the opening credits to an anime. And whenever you did the whole quit to title screen, it would show an ending credits.
Yeah, those were always really fun, and it actually helped. Like if you hadn't played the game for a while, it actually helped remind you where you were.
Mm-hmm. Homer, that did not start in 3. That whole thing started in 2, which of the games, 2 is the best.
I agree.
When the monk says something that definitively, be careful, he'll fight you.
Like
I
agree. Go ahead.
Now, story-wise, yes, second one's definitely the pinnacle of the series, but 3, I would say it's a close second. Why? Because the whole thing with the early Wild Arms titles is sort of like trying to have the wild has more of a wild trying to emulate a Wild West aesthetic. I think the third one did it the best.
As far as looks, I can certainly go with that. The reason why I have my issues with 3 is because of the fact that mechanically the characters were a little too similar to each other.
Yeah.
And for Oxid, we know about that little bit of trivia. And as far as you not accepting my welcome, your compliance is not a factor.
Careful, Vero. He will bringeth the holy light upon thee.
Yes.
My problem with Wild Arms 3, though, is one thing. Why do you have to make the entire game world a fucking desert?
You know, if you look at most westerns, you're mostly in a desert, especially spaghetti westerns that were technically filmed in Mexico.
Yeah, true, but like I said, that doesn't mean. Come on, at least put some fucking water in there for.
The story was that the planet was dying. What did you expect?
Yeah, still.
I'm sorry, but
can't even have like at least a cup of water in the damn game. I mean,
nope.
I understand.
Not allowed.
That'd be like asking for a forest in a Mad Max movie. What are you talking about?
Especially considering that Mad Max movies all take place in the Great Salt Basin outside of what used to be Australia.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah, at least Yeah, at least in Mad Max it made sense because nukes. Especially beyond Thunderdome.
Not taking the bait. The other thing, the reason why I have to be so harsh on that particular mechanic when it comes to Wild Arms 3 is the fact that when you look at its predecessor, every character had some sort of unique motif to them, even if they were still using the whole SP level system, which I actually enjoyed. Including certain abilities that of course would be standard, like Accelerator and Lock On. But there's also the fact that each of them had their own little subsystem to them, some more than others, especially when it comes to Crest sorcery. But with 3, aside from each one of them having some sort of command, unless you're dealing with the Guardians that are affixed with them, there's not a whole lot of mechanical difference between the 4 characters. I mean, like I think one of them had Lock On, one of them had Accelerator, which have always worked fairly consistently. Accelerator always means that you act first during the round. Lock On means you don't miss, as evidenced by the name. And I will say this: 4 does not exist.
Oh yeah, I heard some really bad things about 4.
What are we talking about? I don't know. I don't know how to count that high.
4, yeah, 4 was too much of a fucking departure from the series.
Mm-hmm.
I don't know how to count that high. What are you talking about? There's only 3.
Yep. When it comes to 5, which we'll probably cover if we do a thing on PS2 RPGs, 5 was a nice return to form, and it actually was a redemption of the whole hex system that they were using. I would also be remiss if I didn't point out the PSP game, which is really good. Is a nice spin on the idea of a tactics RPG, but be forewarned, that game is not for the faint of heart. Not in terms of its story motifs or anything like that. It's just that game will kick your ass. And but for the longest time, I ended up nicknaming Wild Arms 4 Cyber Arms, because it felt, while there's always been some SF elements throughout the Wild Arms series, 4 took it a little too far.
Yeah, went away from the steampunk and more into the cyberpunk, which it's
I wouldn't say cyberpunk. I would just say SF. Period. And granted, there's always been some ridiculous future tech, but a lot of the future tech that's been involved with it is always associated with demons or something else, or even outer dimensions, like the whole Kuiper belt thing in 2.
The Kuiper belt, which turned the sky into a freaking earthbound battle background.
And the Kuiper belt was really fun.
Mm-hmm. But part of the reason, I'd say one of the main reasons why 2 sticks out to me is that had a major motif. 2 and 4 had major themes, but I'd say 2 handles it a lot better because it doesn't outright give an answer to its questions. Which is the main question that it asks is the nature of what a hero is. Since after all, Brad in that game was referred to as a hero, always in quotes. but when you see him, he's treated as a war criminal. And GameFan, yes, 4 and 5 uses a hexagon-based battle system, and it actually did an interesting thing with it, where you could, multiple characters or multiple enemies, never both, could occupy the same hex. On the plus side, if you were to use some sort of healing effect, it would affect everybody in that hex. On the downside, if an enemy attacks, everybody in the hex is getting damaged. So it provided a nice little back and forth. The other thing that I found kind of funny is that throughout the Wild Arms series, the bayonet kind of became the game's equivalent of the gunblade.
Oh yeah.
And you had certain other recurring motifs, such as the Schrodinger family.
Were they recurring or weren't they? We'll never know until the next game.
Yeah.
Oh, fuck you. But then we get to, oh boy, the Legend of Dragoon.
Yeah.
This is one of those. You know how we've talked about some games having better mechanics than story and vice versa. This is one of those cases where we have the best of both worlds.
Yep. Criminally underrated.
Now, we talked about some games taking elements from fighting games, but Legend of Dragoon, at the very least, you can say that a standard encounter is never going to be just going through menus.
It took its chops from rhythm games, almost, is what it seemed like.
Yeah, you can't. Yeah, Dragoon. Here's how the fighting works. You can't just button mash your way through this.
Mm-hmm.
You have to do you have to study your patterns, and if you don't, you're gonna miss a lot.
Yeah,
you'll miss a lot. You'll miss worse than John Starks during the '94 finals in Game 7.
Especially, although as a point of boasting, back in the day, the one combo known as addition that I was able to get down pretty pat at the time was Madness Hero, and that's saying something because that's hard to do.
It also had some of the. It didn't have like the most hits.
It had the most hits, but it was that was one where if somebody tried button mashing with Madness Hero, I'd give a disappointing look, but I'd understand because it goes really fast.
Yeah. Bringing up H.C. Bailey again, when he did his run through of Legend of Dragoon, I think he got Madness Hero down pretty well because of the fact that he broke it up into chunks and showed people how it could be done.
Mm-hmm. Like it's not impossible, but it's not going to be a walk in the park either. The other thing to it is I'm pretty sure Legend of Dragoon, if that were to get remade, I'd probably be making henshin jokes.
Now I'm just sad.
The only real problem that I had was I cannot conceive of any reason why the inventory had to be so restrained.
Everything else in the game was too big.
Yeah. There was another game in my opinion that's sort of, I would say, comparable to Legend of Dragoon, but they did that sort of combat situation in that same way. But it's for PS2 though. Shadow Hearts.
I would actually say yes and no, and to an extent, Shadow Hearts we can count it here because I believe the first Shadow Hearts was on PS1.
Yeah, it's called Kodelka.
Yeah, Kodelka is PS1 in 1999.
And I think it was more of a survival horror instead of an RPG, though.
Kodelka definitely.
It was still an RPG.
Mm-hmm. It's one of those things where it's borderline.
Well, exploration was like the Resident Evil games. That's where you get the but it had random battles with turn-based, and it had your HP and MP. It had a lot of very recognizable classic RPG elements to it.
Mm-hmm.
But the survival horror part was the actual exploration.
Yeah, and Homer's mentioning Vagrant Story. I think we'll talk about that later.
Yeah,
because Vagrant Story, that's a whole bowl of wax with that one.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah,
Now,
anyway.
when it comes to getting back to the whole thing with Legend of Dragoon, that was one of those. It's one of those. I'm not going to say the story was at its strongest, and some of the attempts at cutscenes were definitely pushing things a little. That's the thing. Legend of Dragoon is definitely a game that was trying to push the boundaries a bit. The only real complaint that I've ever had was how few item slots that you had. But
Yeah.
I'm guessing that's just a consequence of how much importance the Dragoon transformations, their spells, and the additions thing was. And even with that, it's all it just meant was that for the most part, I barely used any of the attack items. I always just stocked it up with as much healing material as I'd need.
Yeah. Because if you could get the additions down pat, why the hell would you need attack items for?
I would say possibly for elements, but that's what the Dragoon transformations are for. The only Dragoon spell that was a little bit unfortunately animated was that spell from Rose, who I like Rose for the most part, and she definitely fits her arc pretty well, but just Demon's Gate.
Oh God!
Everybody should look that up.
Yeah, it's not bad. It's not some NSFW thing, but it definitely is a case of phrasing.
Oh boy!
Yeah, it's a thing.
Mm-hmm. But you want to? But when I will freely admit this and poke fun at me all you want for making this analogy, but you want to know what kept springing to mind when I first saw the Dragoon forms for this because my first introduction to this was through one of those PlayStation Magazine demos.
Oh, I think I know what you mean by Demon's Gate. Oh God!
But when it comes, but there was a certain anime that immediately came to mind when I saw the Dragoon designs, and I'd like to test the nostalgia with you guys. If you were to hazard a guess, what particular one would that be?
An old style anime
Mm-hmm.
that I would think Saint Seiya.
You're close, but veer a little to the left.
You got your guess, Aaron?
Oh, wait a minute. Well, not really. Unless you're trying to allude where the whole Demon's Gate thing came from.
No, I'm
No.
not talking about Demon's Gate. I'm just talking about what the Dragoon armor designs reminded me of. And
Wait a
Game
minute!
fans got it.
I just realized it. Hold on, let me see.
No, Game fan
Yep.
beat me to it.
Yeah,
Yep.
he thought about it right before it popped in there.
Yeah, when I think transformations into ornate armor, the first thing that comes to mind is Saint Seiya for me.
It's easy.
It would be a few years before I saw that, so keep in mind the timing.
Yeah, well, I understand that. I just Ronin Warriors was not the first thing to come to mind, but I definitely see it. Yeah.
Apparently,
When you said veer a little to the left, I was like, oh, okay.
Apparently, one of the other ones that GameFan guessed was Beat X, which
Well, Homer started with Beat X.
I'll give you credit for bringing up that one, but that was also done by the same guy who did Saint Seiya, so not exactly helping the guesses there. The other thing that I find, I think if there's one thing that probably really ate up a lot of space, it was their inclusion of voice acting.
Yeah, the voice actors did their best, but it was clear they were pretty amateur.
Well, not just that. Voice files take up a lot of space.
That too.
Oof.
Which I think is the reason why Square was always pretty hesitant about doing voiced characters in the PS1 era, and they didn't really start embracing that until the PS2, where you actually had more space to justify it.
More space and actors who were a little more seasoned.
Mm-hmm.
And yes, Game Fan.
Are you really sure about that? Hold on, because
Pretty sure Knights of the Zodiac was what Saint Seiya was called when it was brought over to the U.S.
Yeah, that's what it was called. That's what it was called originally.
Hey, Aaron, play the Japanese version of that scene, and the guy sounds like a crow. He's
Oh, you know what?
Both of you don't.
I'll do you.
Aaron,
I'll do you one better then.
Aaron, don't. And here's the thing. I will admit this is my own speculation, but I think it took quite a while before the Voice Actors Guild actually recognized things like anime and things like video games. I think that was the big issue.
Mid double aughts was when they really started caring.
And I'd imagine that's why if you look at a lot of the voice acting casting in the early aughts, a lot of it is either uncredited or under pseudonyms.
Yeah, still to that point.
Yeah, it's like the only voice casting that actually top tier was the GTA games. That's pretty much it until around 2005, 2006. Yeah.
Well, and with the Final Fantasy X example you just used, that's really the only part of the game where Tidus is over the top, and he's doing it on purpose. It's actually part of the story.
That's why I get pissed off when people try and use that particular thing to make some sort of argument about voice acting, because
if you listen to him the rest of the game, he's fine.
He's fine throughout the rest of the game, and yeah, there's some pausing issues, which is understandable because that was the team's first attempt at integrating voice acting, and it would take a while before they would up their game when it came to translation. But the thing is, when it comes to that, is everybody completely forgets all that happens before that, between the whole thing with Sin wrecking house, but all the fiends getting out in the stadium and Anima showing up, and 2, Yuna's speech about how because people are riding their hopes on her, she tries to smile even when she doesn't feel like smiling.
Yep. And so he forces the laughter for that scene on purpose.
Yeah, I would follow. Well, in that case, you can't really blame the voice actor. It's just weird dialogue.
Well, and you've never done something that turned out really awkward to try and cheer a person up?
That's why we're doing that.
It's an example of they tried to create a human moment with it, and it actually really worked. Sure, people point and laugh at it.
Come on.
Yeah, well, and it's kind of the point of that scene. Yeah, you're going to point and laugh at it, but then you're going to think, Yeah, that's something a real person would do. They'd make an ass of themselves to try and cheer up the people they care about.
Yeah. Also, a lot of people underestimate the importance of comic relief.
Tidus's entire purpose in Final Fantasy X.
Yeah, and his purpose in Dissidia years later would be pissing me off.
We don't bring up Tidus's roles in Dissidia. Jecht
Nope.
is the better Final Fantasy X character in that game, thank you.
It was just that at the time I sucked when playing as him, but whenever the AI was playing as him, he'd always kick my ass.
It's because all of his stuff is about feints and everything.
Well,
Just about every one of his moves has a feint or a dodge, and then it goes in.
Yeah. Now, the next one, when it comes to Grandia, I will admit, I like the original Grandia, but in my opinion, Grandia 2 was better overall.
Oh, of course. It's the reason Grandia 2 is the one that constantly gets advertised on Steam. Whenever you see the ads for when things are on sale, you don't see the Grandia 1 HD remake getting advertised. It's Grandia 2.
Now that being said, some of the element combinations that Grandia had, I thought were pretty amusing, like Explosion being a combination of earth and fire magic, and also, oh, go ahead.
I was going to say, it makes perfect sense. Think about what happened when enough Earth is under pressure with all the magma underneath it.
Yep. But when it comes to Grandia's story, I'd say Grandia's story is more akin for a younger audience, and Grandia 2's is more akin for an older audience. Is the way I'd put it. Extreme was just a popcorn flick of a game. It was all right, and I don't remember a whole lot about 3. I only played it briefly, and I never got the chance to finish it because it was a rental. So I can't comment on how good or bad Grandia 3 was.
Oh, was that bad, huh?
I don't know. I never got a chance to delve deep into it because I was on a time crunch, and I just never got around to grabbing the game to finish it.
Yeah, it looks like the only re-release it got was on PlayStation 3, PlayStation Network stuff.
And Homer's saying we don't talk about Grandia 2. Fuck you, man. I will talk about Grandia 2.
Grandia 2 is fantastic.
Mm-hmm.
I don't know what the fuck you're on, bruh.
Well, rules are meant to be broken.
But we don't talk about Grandia 2 simply because it was on the Dreamcast and then ported over to the PlayStation 2.
Now, I will admit the PS2 port is inferior. Part of that is the fact that it was handled by Ubisoft, and part of that was the way they handled cutscenes just wasn't that great. And when it comes to there is one line that I have screen capped in my meme folder from Grandia 2 that I've used infrequently whenever somebody says something completely retarded. And let me see if I can find that one. It's right up there with the whole "Are you happy, Flan? There's finally someone dumber than you."
Yep. I remember that. I'm actually really happy about Grandia 2's PC ports, though. They're both based off the Dreamcast versions. So
yeah. So if you're gonna get the game now, get the Steam ports.
Or GOG.
Yeah.
GOG has Grandia 2 as well.
Homer, you better shut your mouth about Ogre Battle 64. That game kicks ass.
The reason why he has that stance on Ogre Battle 64 is because of the fact that Matsuno wasn't involved.
Oh, yeah, but still, it still kicked ass. So
He
Oh, found the quote. Your face will be quite ugly if your mouth is shifted 6 inches to the right, which is where it'll be if you don't shut up. Because a friend of mine is doing a first time playthrough of Final Fantasy VII, and they've had a bit of a drinking game of take a drink every time Cloud is a jerk. If I were to do that with Ryudo, I'd be dead.
Yeah.
You'd be dead before the end of disc 1 with doing that with Cloud.
Homer, show me
jerk.
Show me on the doll where Ogre Battle 64 harmed you.
Everywhere. He's going to point at every part on the doll. You know that.
Anyway.
So with Grandia, I think, to be honest, a big part of Grandia that I think doesn't get looked at a lot, at least in most conversations I hear about it, music.
Mm-hmm.
Grandia's music. The music wasn't bad. Not at all. I would say it's more... It's not so much like a score would be. Like, it's underlining the best parts of the game and raising them higher. It's more... A lot of the music in Grandia 1 was very atmospheric. It was meant to sort of be a part of the place you're in rather than underscoring the place you're in.
All right,
And that's just me from Grandia 1 perspective specifically, is what I'm talking about.
That being said, one of the things that I will give credit to the game is its approach to initiative with the whole IP, the Com Act system.
Mm-hmm.
Because it was a very nice spin on the concept of active time battle.
Exactly.
Now, through that one, unlike certain other games on the list, we have instances where the non-casting characters still have a chance to shine. Although when it comes to the Grandia series as a whole, it's definitely I will not deny it's in that camp where its mechanics carry the weight more than its narrative does. 2 a little less so. I'd say 2 is firmly in the middle when it comes to that.
Yeah, as you pointed out earlier, Grandia 1 is a little bit more of a PG story compared to Grandia 2's grittier PG-13 or R story.
Mm-hmm. Now,
and so, go ahead.
Yeah, and it certainly helps that it certainly helps in that matter, especially given the fact that 2 had a major theme about faith. Well, with the gods literally being an actual presence, and also just the faith in individuals.
Yeah.
And having our main heroine basically have a inflicted split personality. Who I would honestly say that Millennia was the breakout when it came to that.
Yeah.
And Homer's asking on the consensus for Arc the Lad. Out of the Arc the Lad games, 2 and 3 are the best. 2 has the best story, 3 has the best mechanics.
And then we have Ark the Lad Twilight of the Spirits for the most laughter.
No, if you want laughter, I can make you play End of Darkness.
No, thank you. I've played it. It did make me laugh. It just kind of made me cry.
The next let's go into the PS1 era of the Tales series.
Tales. I absolutely love this series of games. There have been some hits. There have been some misses.
Mm-hmm.
And in recent times, we're actually been getting a lot of hits. Asteria, Vesperia, Berseria, all three of them are really good.
Yeah. It is unfortunate that we're going to have to wait a while longer for Arise because of the coof, but I am a very patient man. But I'd say the PS1 era was a much more experimental time for the Tales series. Now, there's been some experimental moments in recent years, but the PS1 era was when they first started experimenting with moving away from an MP system, which, to be honest, I think with the way the battle system works in a game like Tales, I've never been fond of using MP for arts.
Yeah.
Because the problem is, I don't have a problem with MP systems on paper. The problem is that when you're using it in an action game, MP needs to be a lot more easy to recover.
Yeah, if you're using MP that often, you have to have a way to recover it quickly, and consistently. Not just quickly; it has to be consistent too. I'll actually be honest here. My first introduction to the Tales of series was Fantasia, simply because I was doing what everybody did in the early 2000s and downloading ZSNES and ROMs with galore.
Although, when it comes to we'll probably get to that in a minute, but when it comes to Fantasia, that's where the first real split happened.
Yeah. Fantasia really drew me in, so playing other Tales of games was always a priority. So I did get to play Tales of Destiny, though not more than once, which made me sad because it was actually my friends, and then he had to move away.
But But I will admit the PS1 ports of the PS1 versions of Destiny have problems, mostly because a lot of studios didn't quite know how to localize their stuff. Like people bitch about localization nowadays, justifiably, but there were other problems with with local. But I will take a bad localization now compared to a bad localization from 20 years ago.
I will take, when it comes to 20 years ago, I'll take any Woolsey localization over any other, because Ted Woolsey did what he could with what he had, and he did very well with what he had.
He did well with what he had, but he didn't have much.
If he can make a story missing 2/3 of its content, Secret of Mana, as good as it was in the original Secret of Mana, I'd say the guy's pretty talented, and he has nothing but my respect.
Yeah. Even if that whole your mom is the mana tree thing was kind of dumb.
Yeah. He wasn't really anywhere else he could go with it, though.
Yeah, that's why I'm not banging on him. I'm just saying sometimes he got a lot from a little, but the emphasis here is little.
True.
Now, when it comes to to be quite honest, I really feel that the Tales of series didn't really come into its own identity until the PS2 era. At least when it came to how it was being presented stateside with was it Legendaria? I can't remember the proper name for the one before Abyss.
Let me pull it up real quick.
I know it was a weird ass name, but I'd say for a lot of people during the PS2 era, Abyss was their introduction.
So, list of the Tales media. So there was on the PlayStation 2. We have Legendia was the before Abyss, and then before that was Rebirth.
Mm-hmm.
But Rebirth was only in Japan, I believe.
Yeah.
Yeah. For example, we didn't. I mean, heck, we technically didn't even get Fantasia till it was on the GBA, and then Destiny, and then Eternia, and then Destiny 2 only came out in Japan, as a Game Fan pointed out earlier. Symphonia, which was actually goddamn brilliant for the time it came out at.
Yeah. I will say this: the one game in the Tales series that I think gets more shit than it deserves is Grace's F.
Grace's F. Yeah, I have I played Grace's F yet? I don't think I have. I've only played the original Graces on
the
PS3.
original Graces. I will not defend. That one was a buggy mess. But
wait, Grace's F was on PS3. Never mind. I guess that is Grace's F. Huh.
The original Graces was a Wii exclusive,
Wii game.
and,
yes,
it was really disliked in Japan. It never came stateside, and from everything that I've seen, it wasn't good. Grace's F, the PS3 version, was pretty damn good, but because of the reputation of its original version, it was a case of shit rolls downhill, and that's why I say that the game gets more flack than it deserves. Because it actually had some of my favorite combat in the series, and was the game that really helped cement that you don't need to do a full MP system with the Tales series. Because instead it used the whole CC mechanic, which I actually prefer.
Yeah, and you know the big thing I like about the Tales series?
Shoot.
Well, I guess it's not a big thing. A very little thing that I like a lot, I should say, is the characteristic genre names each one gets.
Mm-hmm.
Mm-hmm.
Like, for Destiny, originally it was called RPG of Destiny, and then RPG called Destiny in the remake, and then one more RPG called Destiny for the director's cut.
So a lot of revisions.
Yeah.
Well, Destiny got a remake for PS2, and then the director's cut again on the PS2.
Mm-hmm. Now, when it comes to the next one, Star Ocean, and yes, Star Ocean, the second story is most definitely the best of the three. Although, again, if you can find the PSP port, I would recommend taking a look. And
yes, it's also called Second Evolution, by the way.
Yeah, because they also ported the first game, which was just called First Evolution. Both of them are pretty good ports. Some of the arts, some people have issues with the art style. I don't. Art style change. I don't. And of course, Star Ocean did get a anime adaptation in EX, but I only saw like 2 episodes fan subbed, and I didn't see the rest, so I can't really comment on it. Plus, when it comes to anime adaptations in video games, a lot of them are hit and miss, with a whole lot of miss.
Yeah.
Mm-hmm. And we're not talking just miss. No, we're talking. Okay, I'm going to use this reference again. John Stark's '94 Finals Game 7.
Mm-hmm. I'd say one of the rare exceptions is Gungrave, which we'll hopefully get to down the line when we talk about video game to anime adaptations. Period. But that was a case of luck.
Yeah. Now, Star Ocean Second Story. I'll be honest with you. That's the only game in the Star Ocean series that I've ever played. I know there was a one for the SNES, and there was Blue Sphere,
which is a direct sequel to the second story.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah,
for the GBC.
Yeah, but Star Ocean was actually pretty grossly underrated, and because you got a pretty good cast of characters, you had a pretty good battle system.
Mm-hmm.
It did play that, but there is one thing. But there is one standout where I have to just laugh at. You know the final boss of the game, Gabriel?
Yeah.
There's two versions of that battle. One where you just have a straight up fight where it's like 100,000 hit points. You just beat him for like, I think it was a half a million hit points and what have you. But there is a certain thing you can do in which if you talk to, I believe, his daughter or something, you can turn off his limiter, and his hit points are 1.5 million hit points and 20,000 magic points. Keep in mind, this was before the Final Fantasy series got insane with their HP totals. This is 1999.
You're forgetting one thing. You're forgetting one thing, though, Aaron. Star Ocean is a Tri-Ace game. You know how they are with But
remember I said Tri-Ace was going to come into play again later on. Mm-hmm. Here we are.
Well, just remember that Tri-Ace then went completely insane with their numbers totals when you get to till the end of time.
Mm-hmm.
Because there were certain enemies there that you would not be able to outdamage them before they killed you if you're going HP damage, so you had to kill them through MP damage.
Oof, yeah.
I 100%ed till the end of time, which in and of itself is probably a 500-hour experience and is sometimes so god-awful I would never recommend anybody else ever do it. But Star Ocean Second Story is actually really fun to play. I loved Star Ocean Second Story.
Oh, yeah.
Now,
I actually have Star Ocean 1 on my phone as well, so...
Now, when it comes to... Hang on, I had a spammer on my Twitter account. I had to go and hit the old block for. Now, I have to address the elephant in the room regarding Star Ocean is in the fact that when it comes to the fact that its battle system is so distinctly similar to aspects from the Tales series, that is on purpose because of the origins of Tri-Ace. For those who don't know, Tri-Ace was originally known as Wolf Team. The developers...
Oh, Wolf Team!
Thank you for blowing out my eardrums, Aaron.
Might want to turn your mic gain down just a little.
Yep. Now, Wolf Team was responsible for the original Tales of Fantasia, and the head of that studio was not happy about some of the changes from his original Tales of Fantasia story.
Oof.
Like there were some really blatant changes that were made from what he had intended, and he got so pissed off on the matter he completely burnt his bridge with Namco.
Yep, I remember when that happened.
So we're dealing with a mad lad here.
He ended up leaving. Some of the people who were loyal to him followed suit. He formed Tri-Ace, and he's outright admitted that his big inspiration when it came to the Star Ocean games was Star Trek, which I can see with the first two games. 3
not
onward,
with the rest.
Not so much.
Yeah, not with the rest.
The problem is it's really hard to doing SF and fantasy together in that regard, especially space opera and fantasy, is really hard to balance. That's why when you look at a lot of them, you have this whole notion of being on what's effectively a fantasy planet for a large amount of time, instead of doing a bunch of interstellar jumping like you would see in a straight science fiction game like, say, Mass Effect.
Yeah, Mass Effect actually got through its fantasy elements pretty well.
Mostly because all that they had with that was the
Biotics.
whole thing with biotics, and that's as far as they really went. I mean,
Yep.
Maybe someone can argue the relays, but the relays and biotics are still based on the same technology of using element 0.
Yeah.
But when it comes to Star Ocean, I do think that they did at least a decent attempt at giving a proper explanation for their magic with it being symbology, which at least that does have a proper basis. And when it comes to 2, the closest that we really get with exploring the whole Star Trek part of it is the fact that we have a bit of a Prime Directive thing going on. The only real issue that and having the main character in 2 be the son of a supporting character from the first game, which was why I always thought it was kind of weird that Enix made this big Western release of the second story when I don't think the first game ever came to the States until the PSP port and fan translations.
Yeah, that's when a lot of people got very confused. Like, second story? What happened to the first story? Oh, wait a minute. It was a Japan only release.
I mean, I know this kind of thing also happened with Metal Gear, where Metal Gear 2 Solid Snake was an MSX exclusive, and the MSX never made it to the States because PC engines didn't really catch on here.
Yeah.
But that brings us to the final one on the list, and which is Final Fantasy Tactics.
Ah, yes.
Now,
little money.
Okay, H.C. Bailey.
Now, Tactics was a goddamn revolution. I don't think anyone's going to deny that. And yeah, it was giving us our fantasy. We've had fantasy versions of Hamlet and other classical stories. This was giving us our fantasy version of the 100 Years' War.
Yeah.
For about half of it.
Now, before we go on, though, let me remind you, Tactics, yes, it was a codifier, but it wasn't the first game that tried this type of a system. That honor belonged to Tactics Ogre.
And guess who was responsible for creating both of these games?
Quest. What the?
No. You got it wrong. Matsuno.
Matsuno, yeah, that's right.
He left Quest, joined up with Square, and made Tactics. Of course later on, Tactics would be integrated into the whole Ivalice universe alongside Vagrant Story.
Yeah, Vagrant Story. Oof. Oh God, I love Vagrant Story.
The only thing that I never really cared for with Tactics was the whole bravery and faith system.
Yeah, it sounded to me like an unnecessary character that should have been left on the cutting room floor.
I get the intent, because Tactics is a war story, and people are going to cope with war differently. The problem that I have with that is that you can have these sort of parting shots with characters that you're trying to get invested in and trying to build up so you can handle missions better with them.
Yeah, but here's the problem. But I think the problem with the game though is when you get to the later chapters, you get a couple overpowered characters. I'm looking at you, Sid.
Orlando.
You know, when you're how many times have we had it where there's a badass boss character that eventually joins your party and gets nerfed?
Almost all the time for balance purposes.
All the time, but that doesn't happen in this game.
Yeah, when you get Orlando, you get
nuclear missile in your fucking party.
You get a nuclear missile where if you haven't specifically been trying to go for one of the calculator strats, is going to be the strongest person in your party.
Oh god, fucking calculator!
I broke that with mathematics.
That will break. You basically mathematically break the game.
I broke the game.
Literally, said, I realize I've said this a bunch, and maybe down the line we'll make a special just on Overlook PSP games. But I honestly, even with the slowdown problem, I prefer War of the Lions ports of Final Fantasy Tactics over the PS1 original.
I agree, because I'll tell you this right now: the whole little money thing from the original one, that was one of the side effects from janky translation, and translation wasn't at its highest around in the late 90s.
I know some people say, but the PSP port dropped Cloud and replaced it with the guy from Tactics A2. Yeah, and I maintain this. Yeah, and so what? It's not like you were going to be using Cloud all that much, anyways.
Yeah, he was just a guest character. Come on.
As a guest character in the original, though, he was pretty OP if you did it right.
That's true.
But even with that, I wasn't able to fit him into my strategies, and Cloud didn't quite fit.
No, he doesn't, and you get him from a magical portal anyway.
Yeah, he was just there, in my opinion, just to capitalize on 7's success.
Yeah, and now granted, Tactics A2 had just come out around the same time, which is why I'm not going to give War of the Lions too much flack for including its protagonist in this.
Plus, it's a tactics character.
Yeah. So you can rationalize it easily.
This and War of the Lions and the Tactics Over that came out that was remade, I think 10 years ago. I think they're the better ports because, like I said, it fixed a lot of the janky translation and a lot of the reasons why some people don't like to play it through is because. Especially me, because when you deal with janky translation, it's like, okay, what the fuck are they saying?
Yeah, that's also the reason why some people because of the popularity of its follow-ups decided to jump into the original Witcher, and I warned them, be forewarned, you're going to be dealing with jank o'clock, because that was CDPR's first attempt to translate Polish into English, and Eastern European languages don't translate all that well.
That's true. The big thing though is a lot of people I've talked to that played the CDPR Witcher 1, including myself. I actually love the game. I love the whole series. The problem that a lot of people I knew first had was with gameplay, and I was like, you haven't gotten very far then, have you? Because the gameplay seems a little lacking initially, but you start getting more of the toolkit, and it just opens up. And I really appreciate that about The Witcher 1. However, this is enough of a side note.
But the fact is, I do think Tactics story deserves a deep dive all on its own, and I'm pretty sure there's a fair amount of people who've done that. When it comes to the whole Evil East Alliance thing, where they tried to do connections, Some of it works. Some of it works better than others. Um, I do think that Game Trailers was onto something with how they with their theory on the matter, at least at the time.
Yeah. Oh, by the way, I gotta correct you on War of the Lions here. It wasn't the 100 Years' War, because 100 Years' War was
it was
basically
the war
50 years.
it was the War of the Roses.
Mm-hmm. This is War of the Roses.
Yeah, I've sometimes gotten those two mixed up when I shouldn't.
Yeah.
Now that being said, I've had sometimes people have tried to get on me for my preference of the PSP version for dumb reasons. One of them was the fact that a certain Dark Knight was retitled Fell Knight.
Are you talking about Gasparian?
Yeah. Except here's the thing. One, that guy's a prick.
Yeah, fuck him.
Two, the reason that this was done was because the PSP port added in, if I recall correctly, they added in the Dark Knight as an unlockable job. So it was one of those into a corner kind of moments.
Yeah, so it's like, oh, let's just rename him. Fuck it.
Because especially since his moveset never really fit what I expect of a Dark Knight in a Final Fantasy game. Like I never once saw him use Soul Eater
and sacrifice his health to do more damage.
Mm-hmm.
And all that fun stuff.
Yeah. Like when I see a Dark Knight archetype, that's the kind of thing I expect.
There's only one place where Dark Knights don't do that in Final Fantasy games these days, and it's FF14. Because it wouldn't be.
It wouldn't work.
Yeah.
Dark Knights in FF14 are more of an anti-magic build.
Yes.
But when it comes to tactics, first off, I will admit that a long time ago I tried to make a miniatures battle game using some of the motifs from Tactics. I can't speak too much on it because unfortunately I lost the rule set that I had written. But
that sucks.
I do remember I was taking a D6 based approach. I do remember that I had this bit of a thing where I had a playing card deck to represent these zodiacs. The idea was, depending on which zodiac you drew at the start of the battle, or redrew in the case of certain characters, certain rules which it would implement its own rules. I think one of them was that if you drew Leo, any melee attacks you could roll twice and pick the better result. But this applied both ways. The thing with the Zodiac field approach that I had set up was that it was something that was going to be a monkey wrench thrown in on both sides of the fence. So yeah, it's going to give you an advantage, but it's going to give them an advantage too. And when it comes, I also remember a neat little Windows theme that I had that unfortunately is incompatible with modern Windows. I'd say giving the class-based approach to Matsuno and telling him to go nuts with it was a natural choice, especially since at that point in time, I'd even say at the tail end of the SNES era, Final Fantasy was kind of shifting away from its job system that had become a staple for so many years.
Mm-hmm.
And I distinctly remember a lot of people making this dumbass argument that the job system was too limiting.
That is a pretty stupid argument.
And I think that argument primarily comes from people. I wouldn't be surprised if the majority of the people who were making that argument had gotten their start with 7 or 8.
Where the job system wasn't really a thing anymore.
Mm-hmm. But I've seen this kind of thing a lot in the tabletop realm of things, where people argue that class systems are too limiting, and classless games are better because of how much more you can do.
That sounds stupid.
It is because a lot of people tend to forget that when you go full classless, that comes at a price. That price being choice paralysis. There's a bit of a formula that I have when it comes to this. The more potential options an individual character can have in a video game RPG, the less playable characters there will be.
That's okay. So I'd like to add a caveat to that. That I think that's most true when dealing with people of lesser experience, who have less exposure and understanding of whatever system you might be referring to at that time. The classless nature of some games in general can be very freeing for people who have seen it all, done it all. Because they aren't going to have the same choice paralysis. They're going to know what they want to try and make, and then they're going to take this system that has a much freer structure and make it. It's when you're faced with people who either don't know what they want to make, or don't know exactly the right way to go about making what they want to make, that choice paralysis sets in.
I've personally believed that archetypes are a nice middle ground.
They are. They're very much a good middle ground for both experienced players and newbies.
But when it comes to actually, since we're on the Evil East thing, I think this is as good a time as any to talk about Vagrant Story. Now I will admit I still have my copy. Vagrant Story I consider to be a game significantly ahead of its time. When you consider the whole wandering alone in these dangerous areas in an isolated setting, i.e. the kind of thing we have with the Souls games, I think Vagrant Story deserves a degree of credit for helping to pioneer that concept.
It also looks like Square Enix needs to sue the hell out of Konami and Kojima.
What for?
Vagrant Story's original name is The Phantom Pain.
Oh.
I don't think you can do that kind of retroactive suit. And to be honest, I can't see a court actually taking that seriously.
They wouldn't. I'm mostly kidding.
Yeah,
but
especially
they're like, what? Get out of here with this garbage.
Now, that being said, even though I enjoyed the limb-based targeting when it comes to Vagrant Story, I'd say it's major. I guess I'd call it shortfall. Is one, the whole that whole percentage thing I was always kind of iffy on, and two, I guess the best way to put it is its flow always feels very stop-start to me.
Yeah, the percentage thing. Yeah. Especially you get a lot of RNG's problems with this one as well.
Well, you are dealing with a menu-based ARPG for all intents. You're going to be dealing with RNG's, period.
Oh yeah.
RNGesus, the
it doesn't save.
RNGesus, the force that in XCOM says 98% chance to hit. You miss all shots and now you're dead.
Yeah. 99% chance to hit. You still miss.
Or what I really like, this is something that actually happened to me in Final Fantasy XIV. A oh man, it's a node of a super rare gathering material that I need to get to make my next tier of gathering gear. I have a 99% chance and 6 times to hit it. I'm going to get at least 2 of these. None. 6 hits, all normal and not rare quality. It's like, I hate you, Squeenix. I hate you so much.
Fuck your RNGesus.
Now, granted, Square is not the worst offender when it comes to RNGesus, because I think we've made clear that the worst offender to RNGesus will always be XCOM.
Oh yeah.
Now I know some people would argue that would make the argument that I should be ripping into the whole break arts thing. I'm not, because the break arts thing is just a new spin on Soul Eater, and I was already familiar with that whole deal. But the whole combination of things is what really helps for me when it comes to it, and the fact that Vagrant Story is one of those cases where I'd say in some regards it leans a little towards it being supported by its story presentation, as well, and to a degree it's the story itself. And this is the reason why I say it should give some credit for pioneering a lot of the concepts that we see in Souls-like games, because while there are definitely story beats in the traditional sense, when you look at say a Dark Souls game, you have a lot of the narrative, a lot of the lore is about how things got so wrong to get to the point where they are. You also see this in something like System Shock and BioShock.
Yeah.
You have a similar kind of thing with a lot of the lore involving the city of Leamond.
Oh yeah. You get that feeling that I would say in some ways it's sort of a Metroidvania type deal with how they structure Leamond.
It very much is, because you are completely on your own.
Yep.
Especially considering that the majority of the story does detail the relationship between Ashley Riot and Sydney.
Good old Ashley Riot.
Mm-hmm.
You know, it's funny. Semi random piece of trivia. Ashley used to be a very common male's name.
Oh, Ashley?
Yeah. Used to be a very, very common name for men.
Mm-hmm.
Trying to remember why Vagrant Story reminds me of another game I have.
But I will very, very much admit something. Most of the time, I've never been a fan of crafting systems in RPGs. I don't hate them, but if you have an RPG that the majority of its mechanics are built around its crafting system, I'm not going to be running to you. I think that's the reason why I've always had an iffy relationship with the Atelier series.
Yeah, the Atelier series, Atelier Iris and the rest.
Yeah.
Yeah.
I acknowledge that when it comes to its other I acknowledge that they're good games. It's just part of the reason why I'm not big on crafting systems is because of the fact that the recipe is the emphasis on recipes instead of freeform experimentation.
Oh, then you would love Rogue Galaxy.
Oh, I do love Rogue Galaxy. That's one of the exceptions.
Oh, we're on the same page. I have that in my box, literally 5 feet to my right, and right beside my PlayStation 2 that still works.
Yeah. Rogue Galaxy is one of, because here's the thing. When I look at a crafting system, I'm thinking that I want to be able to experiment with the components that I have, and as I get further on and get more components, I have more means of experimenting. A lot of times, crafting systems are based primarily on their recipes. And a lot of the times, those recipes do nothing but cock tease me about the stuff that I need but don't have and have no idea where I'm going to get.
Yeah. And, parts of Rogue Galaxy's factory system do that. But that's a discussion for PS2 RPGs.
Yeah. Well, I'm not going to say that we're going to get to that next week, but we will get to it eventually, because I don't want GeekWatch to fall into a particular rut. If it will.
Yeah.
Like we will most likely not be talking about video games next week.
Yeah.
That being said, Vagrant Story's combination setup with all of its equipment, I end up liking that approach because of the fact that it is more freeform. Where you really are getting the idea that you're MacGyvering together all these different bits of equipment, instead of relying on predetermined recipes. I understand why the recipe thing is used more often, because it's easier to balance, but I ultimately think that letting players go freeform with this kind of thing is more rewarding, even if you have less ingredients in the process.
So you're basically saying the crafting system in this game is very, but it's scaled towards Mad Lads.
I would definitely say that, especially since doing a recipe-based approach in Vagrant Story honestly wouldn't make sense. You're basically in Le Monde, and you have no one to fall back on but yourself.
Yeah, because I do remember playing Vagrant Story about 20 years ago, and oh boy, I went a little overboard on the crafting in that game. Woo wee!
Because keep in mind, you've got combinations for armor, you've got combinations for weapons, you've got combinations for shield, you've got rarer combinations. You've got the relationship between blades and grips. You've got all the class relationships, and the thing about that kind of game is that about a game like Vagrant Story is it is all about matching types. Like how everybody talks about the grid of effectiveness when it comes to Pokemon types. This is that on steroids.
Yeah. So Vagrant Story, it was very in-depth when it came to that.
Mm-hmm. And I believe it had to be because, again, you're only going to be playing as Ashley the entire time.
Yep, you needed variation somewhere. Especially for a game that long.
Mm-hmm. And again, it goes back to that whole thing of less characters, more options.
Yep.
Yeah, and especially with the weapon customization, you're basically like what kind of comparison I should make, because it's like you're basically jury rigging all your goddamn weapons.
Not just your weapons, everything.
And you're jerry rigging your entire setup. Now, I'd like to draw attention to a few other RPGs that aren't on that list. A couple of things that I know that are very near and dear to my heart. Mm-hmm. One of them, or I should say two of them, the Saga Frontier and Saga Frontier 2.
Oh, definitely. I enjoyed the Saga series, but I think both of those Saga Frontier games get very, very little recognition.
Saga Frontier has always been a tricky one to. It's always been a tricky one to go into simply because of the fact that, you know how I've talked about my love for non-traditional mechanics. The Saga series as a whole is the embodiment of this.
Yes, it is.
From the original Romancing Saga that did the whole multiple stories with multiple characters intersecting, from the first Saga Frontier that basically had an anthology approach, and each character played completely differently from each other.
And then when you got the characters into their own sets of parties, all of a sudden combat flow changed so much differently because you could combine their skills to do different things in battle.
Mm-hmm. Saga Frontier 2 had different layers on top of the styles of battle that it had, where you had some fun. And I know different types of battles had been done before. We had that with Suikoden with the whole normal encounter, duel, and mass combat. But I'd say that it didn't go as in depth as what we got with Saga Frontier 2, where you could have battle systems that didn't even look similar to each other.
Yep.
Mm-hmm.
That's what makes the Saga. That's what's always going to make the Saga series a hard nut to crack for people, and that's why with some games that we've talked about have been underrated for understandable reasons, or less understandable reasons. Sometimes it's a case of bad timing. Other times it's a case of market flood. Saga Frontier, I think even if that game came out now, it would have the same problems because of the fact that it never does its combat systems in a traditional manner.
Yeah, you can't really pigeonhole the Saga series into anything. And while I'm happy that the Romancing Saga series had finally come stateside in the last decade,
mm-hmm.
I still even after playing Romancing Saga 3, I was like, you know what? How come Saga Frontier didn't get more praise? Because I think Saga Frontier improved everything that Romancing Saga 3 did, and Romancing Saga 3 is considered the linchpin of the entire series.
Yeah. I will admit that my reintroduction to the Saga series was through Unlimited Saga on the PS2, which is, in my opinion, is the weakest entry.
It is. I was like, yeah, I rented that thing back, and they say, hey, it's another thing with the Saga series, and I play. I was like, what the hell is this shite?
I mean, on its second playthrough, I was able to understand what it was trying to do, but the big problem is it does a very, very poor job of explaining itself.
Mm-hmm.
And I've seen some people say that tutorials are annoying, and that why do you need tutorials when you can just read through the game manual? One, game manuals are becoming a rarity to the point where these days, even if you buy games physical, they don't come with jack when it comes to a manual.
Mm-hmm.
And two, people learn differently. There are three types of learning that people lean towards one or two of: visual, auditory, and kinesthetic. Kinesthetic effectively meaning learning by doing. And that's not to knock people who prefer one style over the other. It's just the fact that some people are going to have an easier time learning from certain actions, whether it be learning by actually doing, learning by listening, or learning by reading about it. Not everybody is going to be able to learn as easily just by reading it. Actually seeing it in action will certainly help. Now, I do agree that there needs to be an option, say on your second playthrough, to skip tutorials, but that's a different matter. And actually, Racevic did a pretty good video a long time ago called "The Importance of Tutorials." And I think with something like, say, Lunar, that game not having a tutorial, I'm perfectly fine with. I'd say games in the Saga series, a tutorial is a necessity. And we lost Xana.
This is like I said, Saga series, like you're gonna need a fucking crash course. You're gonna need like a full class class on it before you play the game, because if you go into this cold, you're not going to have a good time.
No.
I mean, Saga Frontier took it easy on you, but the other Saga games, unless you know what you're doing, you're about to jump into some rapids, and there's a waterfall about a mile that way. You're gonna go there.
Mm-hmm. Great. Now you got me thinking about the Emperor's New Groove. Let me guess. Waterfall? Yep. 40-foot drop. 40-foot drop? Yep.
Yep.
Bring it on. Now, one other game that's not on the list that I do want to cover, and it's technically an action RPG that might veer a little close to being a beat 'em up, but I do want to talk about it because it's a bit of a guilty pleasure of mine that I've mentioned in the past, and that is Dragon Valor. My personal favorite, one of my personal favorite DC heroes is the Flash. Which incarnation? Several of them, and that's where I'm getting to my point. I really like legacy heroes. I've always enjoyed the concept of somebody inheriting a heroic position or title from the past. That's why growing up I was able to connect so well with Terry McGinnis, because well he's effectively the next Batman, so he's got a whole lot of shoes to fill. That's why I know some people don't like him, but I've always seen a whole lot of potential in the idea of a character like Miles Morales. If you do it properly, and some writers did, because there is always this notion of him wondering if he even should be wearing the suit. With Dragon Valor, the whole narrative goes along this line: get the magic sword, slay the dragon, save the girl, continue on as your descendant. Like you go through like four different characters throughout the story, and each one is basically the son or daughter of the last character. So I'm always a bit of a sucker for that, and also because of how Dragon Valor controlled, in a weird way, it's kind of a precursor to what would become the character action genre that we'd see on the PS2 with Devil May Cry. And speaking of action games, I have to bring up Alundra. The first Alundra was absolutely great. The second one, fucking weird. Not a bad game, just weird.
Yeah,
and
like, huh?
Like the first one, it probably doesn't exactly help matters that the first Alundra was published by Working Designs and had their usual amount of quality. The second one was published by Activision. I know Activision is the devil these days, but back then Activision was just weird.
Yeah.
And in that same regard, another one that another tactics RPG that I really think is underrated, even by games from Working Designs output, was, in Japan it was known as Epica Stella. In the States it was known as Vanguard Bandits. Oh, and hey, Xana's back.
Yeah, sorry about that. Had a rolling brownout there that knocked me out for about 5 minutes.
No worries.
I'm about the jet anyway, so y'all have a good night, gentlemen.
Stay frosty. But did you ever get a chance to try out Vanguard Bandits? Which was basically
Vanguard
Escaflowne
Bandits?
before we knew it.
Let me check. I may have. There are plenty of games I tried in the PS1 era that I don't remember half the names of. I have to look at the box art to remember if I played it or not.
Give me a.
I'm already looking it up on Wiki. Vanguard Bandits. Oh, Working Designs. I played most of Working Designs games. I probably did.
Mm-hmm.
It looks familiar. I mean, the giant robots that look like giant suits of armor definitely look familiar. So I probably did. The problem would actually be that there are so many games I played from that era.
Apparently, it was considered average at the time. The thing that I always find weird is that Vanguard Bandits was developed by Human Entertainment, the same people behind the Fire Pro Wrestling series. It's not exactly what you'd expect from them. True.
Very true.
And to be honest, I know some people might say I'm making another tactics comparison when it comes to this. Not really, especially since because of the fact that the combat was based all around the ATACs, which were basically magic mechs.
Yeah.
You didn't have a whole lot of the spellcaster approach, and because of the fact that you had these different unit classes, it's got more in common with Fire Emblem than it does with Final Fantasy Tactics.
I was about to say the same thing. Much more like Fire Emblem.
Mm-hmm.
I definitely agree there.
Yeah, but the whole point with this is that it's there. With all the talk about the funny thing is, whenever I see people go full on nostalgia about the PS1 era, a lot of the games that we've discussed, they don't get brought up as much by a lot of the people pulling nostalgia hard. They might bring up Final Fantasy, or they might bring up Tales, but a lot of the ones that we've talked about tonight, they don't bring them up.
And that's really because, especially PS1 and PS2 era, huge RPG machines, especially the PS2, there were so many RPGs, and unless you were really, really devoted to digging and finding the gems, the diamonds in the rough, as it were, you were only going to hit the surface level stuff. You might hit some of the more esoteric stuff a little bit, things like Star Ocean or Valkyrie Profile, things like that. But you're not going to dig down and find things like the Grandias or even the Brave Fencer Musashis, the Wild Arms. Unless you were devoted to doing that, you weren't going to find them.
The reason why I have to call out this particular attitude is because if somebody was only a surface level person, okay, fine. But when you make a qualitative statement, I expect to see that statement backed up. And if it's not, I'm going to eat you for lunch.
Of course. If you don't have the chops to back up your point at all, or you haven't done the research necessary to make such a qualitative statement, you're it's another one for the wood chipper, as I like to put it.
Yep. Also, one that I forgot to mention that recently celebrated, I think it's 20th or 25th anniversary, is Legend of Mana. Which I know a lot of people, for some reason, really hated, but
Probably
I have a soft spot.
Oh, I love Legend of Mana. I actually have an EPSXE emulator folder on this computer that has 6 different Legend of Mana runs on it, because I always like to take experiment with the map to see what else I can do with it.
Because the thing that I find funny in hindsight is I remember seeing a lot of magazines complaining about how non-linear it was.
Why is there a complaint about non-linearity?
The complaint was that the story doesn't go anywhere.
Well,
To which I say, yeah, it does. Especially since midway through, there's the whole conflict between humans and fairies.
I mean, I just say it does go someplace. Yes, it's non-linear, but it goes plenty of places.
Mm-hmm. Also, I should note that one of the games I covered, one of the RPGs I covered years ago, Legend of Mana serves as an inspiration, and that's Mystic Empyrean, which does place a lot of emphasis on that whole recreating the world kind of thing.
Yep.
But one of the reasons I have a soft spot for Legend of Mana is its weapon system. Yeah, surprise, surprise. The fact that they had, I think, what was it, like 20 or so different weapon types?
I think so. I can pull that up again. My computer, to be honest, is a complete and utter archive of what I've had on it since 2011. So, some of those saves are as far back as 2011, and I think the last one was 2014 was when I did my last playthrough.
Mm-hmm.
But Legend of Mana had a ton of customizability, actually. Ways you could change things.
Yeah, I don't think it was more than 20. I'm pretty sure on that. And
yeah,
again, this comes back to the fact that I have made one thing very clear. Sword and board, the whole long sword and large shield, in my opinion, is the most boring way to equip a character.
Mm-hmm. So, let me see. Knives, one-hand swords, one-hand axes, two-hand swords, two-hand axes, hammer, spears, staves, gloves, flails, bows. So there's your list. I think it's about 10, 12.
And of course the elemental approach that the Mana series had, which was fairly interesting for its time and even to this day.
Yeah.
Now, but with that said, when it comes to a lot of the games that this is something that I said back then, and it's something I say even more so now. Like, I could understand people being closed off when it came to what they would delve into in the 90s, simply because of the fact that getting the word out was a lot harder, and you had to be one of those really hardcore kind of people in order to get some of the stuff. And I mean the kind of guy who would go into well, in my state, Funko-land almost daily and look at the shelves to see what you might luck out on. But nowadays there is no excuse. The only if you can't find it legit, there's ROMs. There is, with so much information that's at our fingertips, there is no excuse not to expand one's horizons. The only thing stopping you is yourself. And if that's the case, fine. But once again, don't make a statement of things were better during this or that time, and yet all you're playing is just 3 games. Or the whole industry sucks nowadays, and if you say that, I'm just gonna go, you're a fucking moron. Go ahead.
That's very true. People who it's grass is greener syndrome is all it is. Grass is greener nostalgia bubbles.
You want to know what my response is whenever I hear grass is greener on the other side? It's only green because of because it's radioactive.
Yeah, I can understand that. No, when people make the qualitative statements about those broad arcing qualitative statements, making a qualitative statement about one thing that you know about, sure. Saying, as you said, oh, the industry sucks today. I look at those people and I go, okay, sure, there are some big blunders you can name. They're really easy to name because, well, they were big blunders. But there are also some massive wins you can name because they're massive wins. It's a balance. Mm-hmm. And I would say that barring some of the terrible practices that the development teams have, things like the constant crunch time and all of those things that are really not good for the industry. They're going to run the industry into a second crash if they keep working that way. But other than some of these things that definitely need to be addressed, I would say in general, the gaming scene continues to improve.
And the thing is when it comes to the whole crunch thing, you don't really hear about crunch problems from indie studios.
Mm-hmm. That's true.
That's why I say that the approach that I've said is, I know some people are doing the doomsaying about a crunch, and whenever not a crunch but a crash, that we're going to be getting a second crash like we had in the 80s, and all I'm saying is, okay, doomer.
Yeah, I'm not saying the crash is inevitable. I'm saying that if a crash occurs, that's what will help contribute to it.
Yeah.
That sort of practice is something that we do rightfully need to address.
What I think the worst case in the reason why using the 80s thing is a bad example is that was a perfect storm of things.
Yeah.
My theory has always been that the worst case scenario that we see is a crunch, where what ends up happening is the bigger end of things have to start lowering their size and basically going AA at best.
Yeah.
But as far as a crash that's just gonna kill the whole industry, there's way too many parts in that machine nowadays. Like,
yeah,
even if the big four suddenly stopped producing, if the big four in the West, EA, Activision, Bethesda, all that, if they stopped producing games tomorrow,
that'd be an overall improvement.
It'd be, yeah, but at the same time, it wouldn't kill it. You might have a lot of finances taking a hit, but you would still see it thrive in other places.
Yeah, it would open the stage for other people to take new risks, because they no longer have to worry about those giants stomping on them with big names during release schedules.
This is also, there were a few instances where people had asked me if I was going to put companies like Ubisoft, Square Enix, Bandai Namco, and Konami into the quartet sections. You want to know? Would you like to guess the reason why I said no?
Because other than Konami, the rest of them don't actually treat their consumer base like garbage.
That's half of it. The other half is simply that they, as weird as this is to say, aren't bad enough. Like, what's the worst that Ubisoft has done? Run a particular gameplay style into the ground.
Run a particular gameplay style into the ground and be pretentious pricks. That's really it.
Yeah, that's, compared to some of the other stuff I've had in the last 3 years, that's Bush League. What's the worst that Square has done? All the Bravest, a mobile game that everybody's forgotten except me. I
mean, Square's never done anything like qualitatively bad like what EA does with their insidious practices of microtransactions and all that stuff.
Yeah.
Whereas the only out of the four that you just mentioned, Konami is the only one I could see approaching the EA, Activision, etc. because they've got the whole buying save slots thing on Metal Gear Survive.
Yeah, the reason why I didn't put Konami on the list is simply because it's impolite to make fun of the dead.
The fruit is so low hanging; it's already rolling on the ground.
Well, I had an opportunity to do it after the whole Castlevania mobile thing got shut down, but I saw that coming because why the hell do you do a soft launch only in Canada? No disrespect to my fellow Canadians, but that's a smaller market compared to doing it in North America, period, like everybody else.
Yeah, no. No, I definitely see why the quartet on the Monastery Live stuff was those 4 big offenders, because the biggest offenses that they do show that they have an immediate and total disdain for their consumer base.
Mm-hmm. And as far I will admit I did consider putting Naughty Dog onto the list. I really did.
Because of The Last of Us 2?
Yeah, because of that. But unfortunately, one, I put Cuckman in the clown car, and two, one instance isn't enough. Now,
True.
if on whatever their follow up is, they end up doing things just as bad with whatever project they're going to work on the PS5, I might reconsider. However, after that, because the thing is with the instances in the quartet, you've got multiple angles you can do. With Naughty Dog, the only angle I'm going to have is just one series, and that's just not enough. It's enough for geeks, but that's as far as it goes.
Yeah.
Also, I have a bit of a prediction regarding The Last of Us Part 2. Aside from it is going to be the video game equivalent of The Last Jedi, yes. And you are going to see its ardent defenders trying to defend it for years to come, with more and more insanity. But from everything I've seen, the people who matter have already forgotten about it because it got completely upstaged by another Sony exclusive through a company that is still fairly reputable.
Oh,
Ghosts of I have not seen one aside from the Witch Hunters. I have not heard one bad word about Ghost of Tsushima from Sucker Punch.
And you won't. I'm going to tell you right now, the most you may hear is, "Oh, like all open world games, it's so empty." And I'm going to say that if anybody thinks the island of Tsushima is empty in this game, they aren't looking hard enough. Follow the birds. The birds will... this was shown in the State of Play a few months ago. Follow the birds. The birds will show you new things. Follow the foxes. The foxes will show you new things. And as I already announced to the Monastery earlier, I did get the collector's edition of this game, so full disclosure, I have this game, I'm playing this game. It is fantastic.
I will probably stream it if I do. Nobody give me some Monday morning quarterback thing.
Yeah.
but actually, if I'm going to make a Star Wars analogy, I think this would be appropriate. Last of Us Part 2 is The Rise of Skywalker. Ghost of Tsushima is The Mandalorian.
Mandalorian, yes! Oh my god. And trust me, you have no idea how right you are when you compare it to The Mandalorian, because it is that high a quality.
And when it comes to Sucker Punch, they have yet to make a bad game.
Yeah, but that's because their development cycles are actually, reasonable.
Mm-hmm.
Notice that, what was the last game that they made prior to this?
A DLC add-on for Infamous Second Son.
Yes, a DLC add-on for Infamous Second Son That's ages ago at this point.
Mm-hmm.
And it was a good DLC add-on too.
That was really early PS4.
Yep. But let me see here. What was the last full feature that they made?
Second Son.
Oh, that's right. The whole thing. But I mean, remember Sucker Punch also made the Sly Cooper games, which I have all 3 of.
Mm-hmm.
But yeah, they've probably been working on this game since production on Infamous Second Son and First Light ended.
I wouldn't be surprised on the matter, and kudos to them for keeping everything on a very tight leash.
Oh yeah, it wasn't until E3 2018 that we even knew there was a game in the makes from them.
Mm-hmm.
And now, oh man, again, no spoilers, but the game is extremely content dense. You can go around, like I said, the wilderness areas where people are going to complain, oh, it's so empty. And I'm going to tell them, you aren't looking hard enough, because it is that content dense. They really tried to make it remain sounding and looking wild, like a wild forest island in Japan. But there's still things to find and things to see, even if it's just the scenery itself. I have found some fantastic vistas.
When it comes to those sort of folks, I'm going to make a bit of a wager. You're going to see them completely change their tune about when Far Cry 6 comes along.
Okay.
And when they do, I'm gonna be there to laugh at them. If I have to, I will be Quattro Bagina walking up in sunglasses.
I came here to laugh.
Yeah, I came here to laugh at you. But
yep.
That is gonna do it for this edition of GeekWatch. Thank you to everybody who tuned in. Next week's topic, I will announce on Twitter what that will be. Because what I'm going to do is I'm going on the pillars thing, and I'm going to roll dice. And when it's announced, I will put it on Twitter, and I will put it on the Discord. So keep an eye on both of those. I do believe I will be bringing in a guest into the monastery tomorrow. Yes, I will. Tomorrow, unless there's some last minute change again, I will be bringing in Sandra Crenshaw to talk about the Vizor role playing game system. And of course I've got a few folks from that I brought in the past who will be making their return, and some new people to show up as well. And last but not least, remember, 5 p.m. is Monastery Gazette, where I go over the news of the week, and not Friday, Saturday at 5 p.m. and Sunday at 9:30 p.m. All Time Central will be the next edition of GeekWatch. But until then, on behalf of the good brothers present and not present, my name is Mildra. I am your gaming monk, and join the watch.